And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. It's fantastic to be here. We have a fantastic show for you tonight because we're going deep in episode 57 of the X series. We're joined, of course, by Gigi Young tonight. Gigi?
Hello, everybody.
It's great to see you.
Good to be here. And hello, everyone in chat tonight.
I know, you've graduated from just chat. Now you're actually a guest again.
Now I'm here.
You do them both so well. It's fascinating, you know, actually, and Miss Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
Of course, Miss Olivia is taking your questions tonight, and what I want you to do is ask them all in caps. We're going to handle them in the second part of the show. The first part of the show, we're going deep with Gurdjieff in the Gobi and mystical Egypt. Now, an interesting thing happened, as often happens when I work with Gigi, and there's a thing up here. It says that Hangouts on Air are going away next year. Okay, well, I guess we'll need a new streaming session. But what happens is that when we get into certain types of issues that I've studied in relation to the mystery schools, there's always something that, Gigi, you tend to pop up when I'm talking about this that goes right to the core of it. And in this case, it was when I was speaking about Gurdjieff in Meetings with Remarkable Men. And of course, we're going to get into who Gurdjieff is and all the rest of it. The people who watch the X series certainly understand, but I'm going to give them that background. But I was talking about Meetings with Remarkable Men, and you and I were talking about this section where Gurdjieff gets invited as a younger man to go to this special expedition to find a, quote, lost city. And there's a guy there who's quite a character named Professor Skridlov, who's always going on these expeditions. And it's kind of like that era of finding King Tut's tomb and all this kind of period. So he gets invited to go, but a number of unusual things happen while he's there. And one of the unusual things that happened is that when they get to the city, they already find, when they get to the location along the way, they already find that people are going in and out of this underground city. And you started to see patterns in relation to this. And then as they're on their way there, there's a very explicit section where they use these stilts to get them above these sandstorms. And I think that this is kind of one of the big keys to this book. But it reads just like, hey, we're in a sandstorm and we need some height, so here we go. And what happens, there's actually a rendition of this. I don't know if we can see that actually. They're kind of up there on these stilts. And they're just above the sandstorm, which is here. And this is about 30 feet up. So they're standing up there and they've got them cemented in the ground and they survive in the book. But Gigi, you did something interesting, and I wasn't even sure that you knew what you were doing, but you said this whole section is written in code.
Yeah, well, immediately I think that if you turn your intuition on and you read certain texts or certain books, sometimes the way things are written will just pop out at you. And this immediately stood out as though it was written in a coded form, several different layers actually. And depending on your consciousness and also your past lives, you would pick out certain themes in it because they'd already be alive in you, or you would just pick out the layered context at the very least. And the stilts for me were how we all have to raise our frequency in order to get through the storm or to weather the storm. We have to be above it or rise above. So really kind of classic example of spiritual technique and emotional technique.
It's fascinating, actually. The idea that they would be putting this in the book, but it seems like it's biographical in Meetings with Remarkable Men. But very oddly enough, and this is something that you didn't know, which is that Bennett, before Gurdjieff died, and J.G. Bennett was one of his ace students, who was a UK professor and researcher, who had actually been sent in to spy on Gurdjieff originally. But he went in there in 1949 before Gurdjieff died, and he spent that last year with him after studying with him earlier. And he asked him about Meetings with Remarkable Men. And Gurdjieff indicated, oh yes, they're biographical tales, make no mistake, but they are written in code, just like you had picked up on, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. So we're going to look more at the codes in Meeting with Remarkable Men. Let's get oriented around Gurdjieff and get right into this. What happened just before World War I hit? There was all this kind of talk about the Russian Revolution and this kind of chaos that was going to lead into it. In 1917 is when that all took place. Just previous to this, Gurdjieff comes into Russia and nobody knows who he is. And he's coming up with these very, very unusual presentations publicly, including lectures on cosmology, demonstration of dervish dances, and all these different things. But he's a very unusual character. No one knows what to make of him, and he's constantly changing his accent, too, which is something that one of his main pupils, Ouspensky, talks about, which is he'd be sitting there and he would talk almost like what we would assume would be like, you know, the King's English. And then all of a sudden he would talk like he was a guy from the Bronx, you know, but all using these different Russian accents that they had up there. So this is an interesting shapeshifter quality with Gurdjieff that goes on all the way through his presentations. And it tells me, they call him the rascal sage because he's not just somebody who comes out and is like, hey, I'm a teacher. He does all these unusual routes, and he's almost at times like a caricature of the thing he's trying to present. But he's also delivering this profound truth that these, even the most incredible, spiritual types like Krishnamurti and all these other people come to him and they're like, this is really wild what's going on here. So this strange poster shows up and Ouspensky gets word of it. And what it says basically is to know, to understand, to be. And it's printed actually in the magazine of the newspaper that Russian journalist and mathematician P.D. Ouspensky is working at. And he sees this. And then it says the science of the harmonious development of man. And it also advertises something called the struggle of the magicians, which is supposedly a ballet that this guy's putting together. But anyway, in the middle of it, there's all this imagery in here, which I won't go too much into, but just to give you some quick idea of how this mystery school was coming public, is there is an Enneagram actually in here, and we're going to describe this shape. And over here, there's a lamb, and then there's a lion, and there's a dove in the middle, and there's a picture of Gurdjieff down here, and there's a devil and an angel. So they were basically communicating their message in one whole pitch before anything even got going. So Ouspensky here, P.D. Ouspensky, starts to associate with Gurdjieff as giving these unusual lectures. And Gurdjieff says, you wrote something in your book, Tertium Organum, and if you understood the things that you wrote in your own book, I'd come here and bow down before you. But you don't understand what you're writing or what you're reading because you don't know how to read or write, actually. And it's interesting because Ouspensky was this kind of incredible intellectual and very spiritual guy. So he comes out with Tertium Organum, which is his book, and then he goes in search of the East for secret schools. When he comes back, having not really found the schools, he meets Gurdjieff in Russia, who is apparently kind of a renegade from these mystery schools. And they have an incredible relationship where, at times Ouspensky has to leave him and Gurdjieff will give him like very heavy duty lessons. But he becomes the author of In Search of the Miraculous that really gives the exposition of Gurdjieff's system. But what he noted about Gurdjieff over and over again is that Gurdjieff was ascribing to the entire field that he was developing. He was calling it esoteric Christianity. And Ouspensky found this very unusual because he was like, it's not a particularly Christian teaching on the surface. He's talking about ancient Egypt. He's talking about these mystery schools. What has this got to do with it? And so it's a very interesting balance as he brings it out. Gurdjieff further gives us this teaching of the Enneagram, which is this 9-sided figure here. And this is apparently also the logo of the mystery school that he comes from. Gurdjieff later, after he comes out and after he does all of these kind of controversial things, or he comes on the scene and people start to become aware of him, he puts out a book about his time developing through his own work and then going into the mystery schools. and studying with them and learning these ancient truths that he was searching for. And he calls the book Meetings with Remarkable Men, who were, in fact, his teachers. Now, in the book, he describes how he's working with someone named Pagosian. And Pagosian, he says, we all called Mr. X, giving us the X connection to the X steganography theme. And what they do is they find something called the Sarmung Brotherhood, which is this logo. And as you can see, if you look at that logo, it basically is the Enneagram, except it does not have the triangle in the middle. So, but it's got the very interesting and unusual shape of the Enneagram, which we're going to look into that a little bit tonight. So the Sarmung is a mystery school that has preserved these teachings down through the ages and avoided prosecution by staying out of the public eye and moving in these secret ways. And they developed something called the Fourth Way, which was, there were three different ways basically to attain this incredible advancement, spiritual advancement. The first way, the ways were the way of the priest, the way of the monk, and the way of the fakir. And each one of them had their own advantages. One of them was about devotion. One of them was about mind over matter. And the other one was about mastering the body-mind connection. So the fakirs in India could lie on a bed of nails for 10 days and then get up and act normal. So they had incredible physical control. And the yogis could completely do all of these incredible psychic feats. And the priests had this incredible devotion quality. So those were all different ways to develop this power in order to spiritually evolve. The fourth way was the one that the Sarmung Brotherhood had. And that was something that you couldn't go away to a monastery for. It was something that you could only develop in real life. And so they taught the fourth way was something that you could only exercise under the strain and the circumstances of an everyday situation. Yet you couldn't be in some special, you couldn't be in a retreat. So, and there was a series of things associated with it. And he was saying, Gurdjieff's main teaching was we have to bring this out in order for the mystery schools to kind of save humanity from itself. He was a little more blatant about it. But certainly Blavatsky and Steiner were also saying the mystery schools were coming out to do this. That's the context for Gurdjieff coming out and giving his system. And then we get from there into meetings with remarkable men. But Gigi, as we've done looking in the X series at these different things, you've started to really get a good point of view about the mystery schools themselves and the value that they have and how their message is becoming more valid now because they've vouchsafed those truths for us.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this the other day because I come from a New Age background. I was raised atheist, for those of you who don't know, and I had my own spiritual awakening that was kind of like fed on, the New Age and, spiritual books and things like that, and which I absolutely love. And I'm always going to be, for wild, independent spirituality. But then when I started, because then what, but then I started learning a little bit more about the mysteries with the capital M. And what I found there was that it's all of the New Age for all of time. So it's sort of like, this is the teachings of all eras that have created a through line that we can stabilize our sort of wild, independent New Age spirituality. We can kind of bounce them together to create the teachings of the era. Basically, that's how I see it, is that, and I was kind of intimidated at first when I was looking at this kind of stuff because I really thought that everything was secret societies. And I didn't think, I didn't think that there was actually value in a mystery school because I had so tightly wound it with secret societies, and I thought that they always used occult things for darkness. And so it was a really shocking moment for me to see that there are actually both sides that exist in the world. So. Yeah.
Well, this could almost be like a propaganda put out by the schools that are what they call left-hand path schools. And they do fuel the kind of dark side for the secret societies and things. And what happens if people just think, oh, secret societies are bad, mystery schools are bad, they miss this entire group of Rosicrucian schools, the Pythagoras schools, the traditions that go all the way back to the Egyptian mystery schools, the Greek Hellenistic mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, all of this stuff which was there to raise our consciousness level. And
which we were part of because we were alive during those times. So those are pieces of ourself. And that's what's really important, is that the mysteries are the mysteries that we were involved in past lives. And so to think that they're all negative or that or whatever is to disconnect ourselves from our past and from our history as mystics. And so I think that that was really important for me too, is to see ourselves, is to see our mystical past, which is not going to be in mainstream history books. It's going to be in certain schools that have kept those things alive very purposefully. And it's going to be up to our own heart and soul to discern the root, really. So.
The root, this is a really good point, actually. Well, here's a quick question, which is how dangerous is this process where people just look at something and they're like, oh, it's Illuminati, it's evil, it's bad, I'm out of here, and like, oh, that person's Illuminati and evil, and on the thinnest possible basis. We were talking about this tonight, Olivia, because when we did the Graham Hancock meeting here in Cambridge, we had a fantastic time, and there was a woman who, because I held my hands like, and you hear this sometimes, I used to hear this thing when I was online that I didn't blink.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really good one. So it was like DJ the clone, but
I'm a lizard too.
Yeah, you're a lizard.
I have lizard. I'm a lizard as well.
You get lizard eyes.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah. Or cat eyes. What's going on? Like. So here's the danger of that, okay, which is people get wound up about it and they're not working on a lot of knowledge. So they're like, oh, Edgar Cayce talked about the White Brotherhood. It's a secret society. That's evil. Rudolf Steiner talked about the Rosicrucians. Oh, it's a mystery school, So it's this kind of limited knowledge impact. It's kind of like I want to act out this thing where I get to judge, and where I get to point out somebody. It's the equivalent, really, of in the Pilgrim days when they were like, witch, it is. Really. And they get a big charge out of that. And it's like a rush almost. But unfortunately, you see a lot of it around the independent media. And it's to really understand it's a totally different thing. Because if you can understand the occult, then you can understand when it's being used. I think that's a very important point. But also the mystery schools tradition is the spiritual tradition. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. And what you were saying about your hands being held in a certain way, I think that we also need to remember that the left-hand path or the dark side, they can't really create things. They can only distort what works and what is done.
Right.
So if somebody is doing something, if it has any power, then it's probably can be used for light as well. So because you see someone holding their hands like this or doing something, it doesn't necessarily only refer to something dark. That's not how the occult works. We have to understand that all symbols are first neutral for them to work, right?
Good
and then
point.
we add meaning to them. And there's a lot of channels that do this as well, because of how it connects our brain and how it focuses our energy. So, I mean, so we have to be careful that we educate ourselves. We have to educate ourselves in the occult before we make all these judgments about people, Oh,
it's fascinating too. And I think that this is part of the junk conspiracy, which is in dark journalism, the way that I practice it, there's always been the official story that gets put out. And then there's the story, the counter story underneath that. And the official story is always put out by the government or the establishment to cover something. And then the counter story is to break through that story to get the answers. And you see a lot of professors, a lot of researchers, a lot of authors breaking through and poking holes in the official story. And the media is like, that's the conspiracy theory. So that's a battle that goes on But then there's this other thing that comes in, and that's the junk conspiracy, where, you know, you see people rolling out these things that are just, you know, off the edge, like flat earth or junk like that. And what happens is it's trying to give the effect of people saying, you know, oh, this is all so crazy, I'm just going to go back to the official story because it's easier and, you know, my head won't hurt so much.
And it's socially acceptable. I'm not going to be weird. I'm not going to go all out of my way and be a weird conspiracy theorist, you know, for this, you know, I have for me to do that.
Well, it's a good point, Gigi, because tonight we're going to talk about Gurdjieff and the Gobi. That's lost civilizations, Atlantis, Mu, aliens, mystery schools, and the complete collapse of society. So there you go. That, in a nutshell, Olivia, I think that's about it.
Olivia is sighing in the background. She's like,
there's so much to cover. And that's definitely the gossip that's been going on in the community.
There's a lot of gossip. I do want to mention this, which is a little kind of news flash, which is that Luis Elizondo from To the Stars Academy, who we've reported on extensively in this program, is part of the Central Intelligence Agency's action to take over the UFO file through the To the Stars Academy with this narrative and working with certain elements in politics like Harry Reid and good old dependable New York Times to create this kind of UFOs were discovered in December of 2017 narrative, to create this kind of false authority in the field and have the CIA move their propaganda forward while they're doing the actual redevelopment and trying to get at the whole UFO file. Well, Elizondo, you know, I put out my reports. John Greenwald put out his reports at the Black Vault, and a fantastic article in The Intercept came out exposing the fact that Elizondo, you know, the timeline that he's laid out for the ATIP program didn't add up with everything that all the other potential players in it said. So they had all the dates wrong. That was problem number one. Problem number two is that Elizondo said that he headed the program, which was this advanced aerial threat program, and they were dealing with UFOs as threats. And here we go with the threat. And if you watch the program that's actually on tonight, they have it unidentified on the History Channel. All they do is they say, and how are you doing today? Threat. This is their thing. They just the whole thing's about they're under threat and the UFOs are a threat and we need money to combat the threat. Interestingly enough, there's enough people in that show and in the background at TTSA who participated in the Iraq War. So when they say threat, I guess they mean threat. But the point is that today, Luis Elizondo, the Pentagon was asked, because a number of questions came up in relation to the Intercept article where the Pentagon said that Elizondo had nothing to do, no responsibilities at all in relation to the ATIP program, which meant essentially that counterintelligence agent Elizondo was a liar. I mean, there's no other way to spin that. And so what happened was the journalists who had participated in this, like over at Politico, for example, and the TTSA, and Open Minds and people like this, they were all like, you guys are going to eat it because on Friday, the Pentagon's going to come out with a new statement and they're going to exonerate Elizondo and so on. And they tweeted this out and they did everything else with it. Well, interestingly enough, today, as reported by the Black Vault, the Pentagon did in fact come out with a new statement. And you know what the new statement said? It said Elizondo had absolutely nothing to do with the ATIP program. And that was the word. And they deleted Politico writer and TTSA deleted those predicting tweets saying they were going to be exonerated on this today. They didn't say anything. They're totally quiet as church mouse as their entertainment show plays up tonight. And this is part of that again, Gigi, where these people come out, they're intel ops, they're marketing ops, they come in to harvest people's attention. And that really, in a sense, it interferes with their knowledge base, but ultimately it interferes with their spirituality also.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, we subconsciously associate UFOs with our consciousness. We remember that. Even though we're in this life here, we still remember when we had higher dimensional crafts, when we interacted with higher dimensional beings. We're at the bottom of the barrel right now in a Kali Yuga cycle, a cosmic night. Like, we are a fraction of what we are, and we know we are more in our heart. And that is what we miss all the time every day, is that part of ourselves. And so when somebody comes in and they start saying, oh, UFOs are a threat, oh, UFOs are a threat, what they're saying is fear your own self, fear your own spirituality, do not awaken, stay where you are. And we should be all very concerned about that. And we should all be understanding the games going on, also to create confusion by changing the UFO terminology. So we cannot gather and be a community and awaken at the time we're supposed to awaken is also very sick. It is bad to do this because obviously the CIA is extra constitutional. Like, obviously that's clear, but
Right.
we also talk about how sick this is to do to people.
Yeah.
On a human level, to say you can't connect with your spirit and your higher self, that's very sick. And we need to realize that there is that human level to this too.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating because they want you to call it UAP, right? You can't call it UFO. We're going to change your terminology and we're going to call America homeland instead of the USA. I mean, a lot of it is loading language, and cults use loading language. I wanted to point this out since we're on this topic about the mystery schools kind of being under siege in this period. Now, interestingly enough, in the New York Times, and I was shocked to see this, but not so shocked. Here's an article in the New York Times, bastion of anti-vaccine fervor, progressive Waldorf schools. There's the New York Times taking a direct hit at Rudolf Steiner and his Waldorf schools, which are doing really well in America and educating young minds and creating this independence. Now, the article goes on to say, I'm going to quote it directly. This came out today. The Waldorf method encourages children to learn at their own pace. Oh my God, how terrible.
Terrible.
How insidious. Textbooks are banned until the 6th grade. And technology and smartphones are prohibited altogether. Well, we can't harvest them then, Gigi. We can't harvest their brains. It's a sin.
They can't be addicted. Yeah.
Dance and arts are emphasized as tools to learn. Oh, he's full out Satanist. Jeez. My God, he wants people to learn the alphabet. It's incredible. The Waldorf schools were founded in the early 20th century on the teachings of Rudolf Steiner, charismatic Austrian educator who preached a philosophy called anthroposophy that included eccentric medical theory. Aha. He taught that diseases were influenced by astral bodies. Well, they got to punish him for letting that one out. That's interesting. And he taught that humans can also breathe through their skin. While he did not completely reject vaccines against smallpox and diphtheria, he said rosemary baths were better for diphtheria and that smallpox could be avoided by being mentally prepared to confront it. That's pretty deep. That's pretty deep. Of course, they're using selective edits there. But I find this fascinating, the hit job on Steiner, Gigi, just as he's emerging, and really just as we're getting into this period where his work is starting to saturate over from Europe to America. What's going on here?
It's the same thing. It's the same movement with the TTSA. It's stopping people from having their own authority over themselves and their bodies, their kids. It's the same movement, except this is, really sinister. I mean, it's crazy that people are okay with that. I mean, if we need to evaluate any school system and start going over a fine-tooth comb, it's going to be the public one. I mean, we need to start going over that, really, at the end of the day. But it's the same movement of squashing individuality, independence, and just if there's any chance that people may actually ask, what is an astral body, or does my higher self actually affect my environment? And that's what creativity does too. Music, the arts, it connects you with the part of you that's non-physical. So they're basically just squashing out any avenues for spiritual development they possibly can, unless it's probably a very controlled, distorted religion or something that they already have infiltrated. If they haven't personally infiltrated something, they're going to destroy it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey, listen, spirit cooking, right? We know what they like the best.
That's their thing. It's only for them to use. Only they can access the higher realms.
Right.
Way. No one can do it in a healthy way.
Right. Exactly. They're like, hey, we can do our Crowley thing, but you bring out Steiner, and they're going to hold up an upside down cross at you. To me, it's fascinating because the Waldorf schools. It's such an interesting legacy that Steiner has left us here. Biodynamic farming, incredible results with it. Any farmers who use it, it's remarkable. This is what Steiner was giving. The Waldorf schools, developing young minds and building in this sense of spirituality, building in the arts, building in that sense of dance and music and all the rest of it. What they're trying to say here is that these people in the Waldorf schools, that they are not going to take vaccines, and that as a result, everyone's going to die of measles, this thing about measles is completely overblown in such a weird, bizarre fashion that it's absurd to even look at it from this level. And we know that in most cases, there are more deaths from vaccines for that than there are deaths from measles. I mean, deaths from measles are in the single digits. And if you do it from the year 2000, it's something like through the whole world, it's less than 50. It's absurd. So what they're trying to lay out there and trying to get everyone, and there's this whole thing going on in New York, and I'm not going to have a big hoedown on vaccines here, but there's a big thing with Hasidic Jews who, as part of their religious practice, don't want to participate in these things, and they're being forced to, or they face a $13,000 fine. In that article, again, they're trying to use a wedge against the schools, teaching things differently, looking at it differently. They're trying to get everyone into that system, because if you're out there, you'll attract others and you might get outside of this control grid. It's a pretty dangerous situation, Gigi.
It is. I mean, just to round it out, they have a schedule. They have a schedule. We are working on cosmic time here. And they have a schedule that they have to get things done by.
Right.
Everybody has to be a drone in every way at a certain time. And we are nearing that time. So they're trying to push this. And by doing this, you expose yourself. So, I mean, we can look at this as a push to do this, but we can also look at it and say, wow, that's really sloppy. And wow, now people are asking the right questions and people are becoming more aware. So they're rolling this out faster and faster and faster, because we also have to realize that they're on a schedule.
Absolutely. It's a great point. One last thing on this, Gigi. Making Steiner the target of the article and the Waldorf schools, how do you see that?
Well, I see Steiner, I think, as being the biggest threat to them, because he has probably the biggest body of work that survived, because he personally wrote it for this time. Right. And he apprehended, he knew that a lot of this was going to go on. And so they're seeing how well they're attacking him because of who he is and what he did. And they know that. They realize that. They know exactly what's going on, because everybody's referencing the same books. Everybody's knows the same thing. It's only the public that are unaware. So
yeah, excellent point.
There's personal things going on too. This is a battle. I mean, that's what's going on. So
yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating too, because I think with Steiner, it is the kind of thing that when people look out and they want a better life, there's a body of work, that literally was left for the 21st century through anthroposophy. It's so far ahead of its time. And that includes eurythmy. It includes these different things that he left, the spiritual science. And he has something which is a threefold order for how societies can work. I think that these concepts are dangerous. And to me, when I was looking at that, I said they're using their lead attack dog, the New York Times, and they're aware of the timing on the other side, which is that window that Steiner talked about, that the mystery schools would resurge in this period, and that anthroposophy would have a chance to break through, for example. So we're in that timeline.
we are in that time, and they know that they know what they're working with, and so we'll see how it goes.
They didn't count on Gigi Young being out there. Miss Olivia, your question, how's everything going out there?
Things are great. Not too many porn trolls tonight, although they have been here.
Have you had a few?
Yes.
Like 18 strawberries and then a like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've had some very, very interesting bot invasions in recent chats, but you know, this is how we get through. We grin and bear it. One thing I do want to say in relation, I want to remind everyone you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is episode 57 of the X steganography series. And it's fascinating with the X steganography that whenever we go into one of these areas, if you're looking at theosophy, if you're looking at mystery school secrecy, or if you're looking at government secrecy, oddly enough, you're going to find the X right in the heart of it. And here we have, in this story, with Gurdjieff, and the kind of fascinating provenance of his work, we have this very interesting Pagosian character who comes on the scene and leads him into this excavation to find the Sarmoon Brotherhood. And he refers through the whole chapter to Pagosian as Mr. X. So here we have that X steganography right in the heart of the Gurdjieff Mystery School. Gigi, it's interesting. Here we go again.
Well, who is Mr. X?
Who is Mr. X? Excellent point. Let's get at Gurdjieff here. This gives us some idea of man. This is somebody who grew up in very, he's a Greek Armenian. He grew up in this area of Tiflis. And if you get there, you know, there's a lot of rough terrain when you get around that neck of the woods. And when you're talking about Armenia and the wars that were going on at the time and the mountainous regions that he had to cross when he went into places like Afghanistan, where he said a lot of the mystery schools were, by the way. I always find that interesting because of the bombing campaigns that we've had over there. But what I do feel when we're looking at Gurdjieff's work is that this is somebody who was dedicated to get inside the mystery schools, who spent that time going to it. And Meetings with Remarkable Men is his story of the search. Now, in the middle of that book is this very unusual expedition with Professor Skridlov. Now, these names are all interesting too. He meets Skridlov through Prince Lubavetsky. Prince Lubavetsky, Gurdjieff did in fact in his life hang out with Turkish princes, and he knew a lot of this royalty, interestingly enough. As a matter of fact, when Bennett was doing spying on him, he was spying on him because he was meeting with this Turkish prince. But Prince Lubavetsky in the book is an odd character because he goes through he's this millionaire and he goes seeking for these spiritual traditions, but his life is empty. And then he finds this reference to the Sarmoon Brotherhood, and he becomes part of the mystery schools. When people looked at the book later, like J.G. Bennett, they discovered that the name Lubavetsky meant love of knowledge. So here we go again with the interpretations in the book and ideas coming forward. And Gurdjieff is laying in these different layers to get us to understand. Now, there's a portion, Gigi, that you picked up on, and there's no question I should mention in terms of the work that you do, which is it's highly intuitive. This is very psychic work that you can do, but few can get, in my opinion, to this level that you get into when you're looking at this material. You can go retrocognitive, you can go and look at these past events, and you really bring forward new and exciting information when you do it. And for me, it's always a revelation, and we've had some incredible things that have come up in relation to you working on the X steganography. But one thing I found interesting is you interpreted part of this excavation when they were going to excavate in the Gobi Desert, this lost city, as an allegory on one level, especially when one of the key people from the expedition dies and he's killed by a wild camel. Gigi, what was the reference there?
Oh yeah, he was killed by, it wasn't like a pack of wild camels.
Yes, this is an odd thing.
Yeah, and he runs off from the group. He just decides he's gonna go off on his own after them. He's kind of like a Hemingway character,
Yes.
if you will. And so he runs off and he essentially gets bitten in the neck by a wild camel. And so he betrayed his group. And unfortunately, everybody had to turn around and go back. So
this is the end of the expedition.
yeah, it was the end of the expedition. So that was a little bit it was a little bit of a false start in a way.
It is, because it's all exciting. You spend all this time, you stand on these stilts, you go into the desert, and you are in the book. It's built up because there are all these excavations going on. And Professor Skridlov comes to Gurdjieff and says, we're coming to find this lost city in the Gobi. And it sounds so much like these cave churches that you and I have been looking at. And there's a lot of things about this lost city in the Gobi. It turns out there's a real history in the Cayce work and in other mystery school traditions that crisscrosses with this, and we're going to get into that. But one thing I thought was interesting, Gigi, is what you said to me in relation to it is when this hunter character comes out and he takes off on his own and he goes to shoot these wild camels, and then he gets killed by the camels. The allegory is he broke away from the group. He kind of disobeyed the mandate, but now because they all went there together, they all had to go through together, and because they can't go through because one of them's dead, they all have to retreat. This is kind of an energetic allegory.
Yeah, it is. So there were events that took place in the Gobi when time was a bit more slippery and when the densities were a little bit more slippery. At least that's how I perceive it. What I remember is that there was a fall in that area. So it's not just like there's a city in the Gobi and there's an underground world and everything that we've heard of. There was actually a fall that took place at the Gobi because of the Gobi around that area. Gurdjieff and the mystery schools knew this. They knew that it wasn't just about this underground city and mystery schools. It was about an event that happened that we're trying to recover from. And so the event had to do with not sticking together and being in your ego. And, so that's what that is about. And that is also to trigger people, obviously, into that remembrance.
It's fascinating. And just to give people a little hint of how Gurdjieff is portraying this and the kind of coded language that he's using in this allegory, which is a very exciting story. And Peter Brook actually turned it into a movie in 1979, and they could only cover so much of it. So it's a limited effort, but it is quite fascinating. But this is directly from the chapter dealing with the Gobi, and he's talking about these stilts and the sandstorms. And he says, quote, although we went through 2 terrible sandstorms, we arrived several days later, almost at the heart of the desert, without any fatigue and fully satisfied with everything. Even with having learned the language we needed. Gigi, that was kind of interesting. He's picking up on language somehow. They learned the language.
Yeah, the language thing. Yeah. So this is like a Babel situation, Tower of Babel situation where I think when he's referring to language, it's not just like words, it's how we actually comprehend information and communicate information. And it takes a certain state of consciousness to speak like this, and then to speak telepathically, where images are joined with feelings, which are joined with words. So it's a different state of consciousness, different state of communication, and he's calling that language. And so when he's saying we lost language, it means that, well, when he's saying we were good with our language, he's saying that we were okay with where we were, or we understood where we were.
It's fascinating when you get into language, of course, in the Tower of Babel story, they get to this point where the gods huddle and are like, if they're getting to this point, humanity, where they're building this tower to the sky, and soon anything that they imagine they can do, they'll be able to do. Let's confound their language so that they can't communicate with each other, which is an unusual thing for the gods to do in the Bible.
It is unusual, and there's also that level in Gurdjieff's story where obviously they're building stilts to the sky.
Right.
What are they doing? Are they also trying to connect different densities together? Are they trying to create a portal and a vortex so that we can be merged with a higher realm to lift energy? You know, so we have to consider, what does it mean to build something to the sky? A tower, stilt, what is that referring to? What were they trying to do? They're using language that we can understand in our consciousness,
Right.
So
they're bypassing the intellectual mind completely and going directly to their conscious mind. It is interesting when you get into the language aspects. What he says after that is, we were approaching the spot, which was the principal goal of our expedition. Everything would probably have ended as we planned if it had not been for the accident to Soloviev, who is the Hunter Hemingway character we talked about. But he says there, we were approaching the spot which was the principal goal of our expedition, presumably the lost city in the Gobi. He said, we'd been traveling mostly at night, making use of our abilities of our comrade, the experienced astronomer, to orient ourselves by the stars. Also interesting. One day we made a halt at dawn to eat and also to feed our sheep. It was still early. The sun had only begun to grow hot. We were sitting down to our freshly prepared mutton and rice when on the horizon there suddenly appeared a herd of camels. We at once guessed that they must be wild ones. Soloviev, a passionate hunter and a dead shot, immediately seized his rifle and ran in the direction where the silhouettes of the camels could be seen, and we, laughing at his passion for hunting, settled down to the hot food. I say unprecedented because in the midst of these sands and so deep in the interior, it is usually considered impossible to build a fire, as there is sometimes not even Saxol to be found for hundreds of miles. That's how you make a fire in the desert. But we built fires at least twice a day. An hour and a half passed since Soloviev had gone after the camels. We were already preparing to continue our journey, and there was still no sign of him. We waited a further half hour, well knowing that Soloviev, who had never kept anyone waiting and fearing some mishap, all but two of us took our guns and set off to search for him. Soon we again perceived the silhouettes of the camels in the distance. A tree-like shrub that grows in the sands. Oh, I guess that's how they make their fires. Okay, as we came near the camels, evidently sensing our approach, the camels fled to the south, but we kept going. 4 hours had passed since Soloviev had gone. Suddenly, one of us noticed a man lying several hundred paces away, and when we came up and we recognized Soloviev, who was already dead, his neck had been bitten half through, and all of us were overwhelmed with heartrending grief, for we all loved this exceptionally good man. Making a litter of our guns, we carried Soloviev's body back to the camp the same day, headed by Professor Skridlov, who had set up the expedition to the Lost City, performed the duty as priest. We buried Soloviev with great solemnity in the heart of the desert and immediately left that accursed place. Although we had already done much towards the discovery of the legendary city, which we had expected to find on our journey, we nevertheless changed all our plans and decided to leave the desert as soon as possible. Peace to thy soul, honest and ever loyal friend of all friends. Gigi, his neck is bitten out. This is fascinating to me because they're communicating something there again with it's an energetic signature. It's
the language thing again because of the throat and the language and that. But that's also, it goes deeper into actually Jupiter. The planet Jupiter is the throat. So that's the chakra that it corresponds with Jupiter. Blue, Jupiter, the two-eye stone, the throat.
Yeah.
They're all kind of a certain resonance, and so when the camel bit the throat, it was representing that this threshold was not met. We did not build the ladder to the sky for where we are in our density and dimension. The throat chakra is the sky. It's blue. It's the sky. That's where we're going. We're going up. And we're going to, in Steiner's cosmology, New Jupiter. And that's all the same thing for a reason. It's all the same language for our building up that into that higher sphere, the higher density. And so that's why he was bitten there. It was his hand, wasn't his eye, it was his throat.
Yes.
So
yes, it's fascinating. The levels and the layers that Gurdjieff is leaving in there. And it's interesting that you mentioned New Jupiter, which is what Steiner said we're evolving towards, in which Ahriman is on the deflection path for trying to get humanity denser and denser into virtual reality, into scientific materialism, so that we can't make that evolutionary jump spiritually and create this new environment. I also find that interesting because in Revelations, in the biblical tradition, in Christianity, in the mysteries, it is New Jerusalem they talk about. And this is what's in Revelation. This is what he's looking at. He's beholding the New Jerusalem. And this, for all intents and purposes in anthroposophy, is New Jupiter.
it's the same J sound to me. So,
Right. Exactly.
yeah.
Well, since we're talking about sounds, I'm actually going to show everyone the map of the Gobi. This is interesting. So you basically, just to give some orientation, China is here, Mongolia is up here, and the Gobi Desert stretches out here right in the middle. It's this portion, the southern portion of the Gobi, that apparently where this lost city resides, and of course the Himalayas right there, just to give us some orientation, some idea where we are. And trust me, the revelation around the Gobi and Gurdjieff and the Gobi and the combination of Cayce's work on this lost city of gold in the Gobi and modern, really truly breakthrough stuff that they're finding out about what's there. We're going to get into that too. But before we do, oddly enough, in the work of Cayce, in the work of Gurdjieff, there is this reference to pre-Sans Egypt. It's very interesting, of course, with the work of Graham Hancock talking about how Egypt was a thriving civilization 10,500 BC. Cayce talking about it then. The geologist Robert Schoch talking about how it was a totally different climate with rains and something totally different than the desert climate that it has now. Gigi, oddly enough, there's a reference to Christianity actually having flowered there, 10,500 BC. And of course, Christ and Christianity, we all know the period. Supposedly, according to the calendar that we have, the best orientation is Christ is actually born in 4 BC. But I'm going to read this because this is from Gurdjieff and gives us a snapshot of this pre-Sans Egypt esoteric Christianity that presages the Christianity that we know. Quote, this is In Search of the Miraculous. Gurdjieff speaking, the Christian church, the Christian form of worship, was not invented by the fathers of the church. It was taken in ready-made form from Egypt. Not only from the Egypt that we know, but from one which we do not know. This Egypt was in the same place as the other, but it existed much earlier. Only small bits of it survived in historical times, and these bits have been preserved in secret and so well that we do not even know where they have been preserved. It will seem strange to many people when I say that this prehistoric Egypt was Christian many thousands of years before the birth of Christ. That is to say, that its religion was composed of the same principles and ideas that constitute true Christianity. Special schools existed in the prehistoric Egypt, which were called schools of repetition. In these schools, a public repetition was given on different days, and in some schools, perhaps even every day, or the entire course in a condensed form of the sciences could be learned at these schools. Sometimes this repetition lasted a week or a month. Thanks to these repetitions, people who had passed through this course did not lose their connection with the school and retained in their memory all that they had learned. These schools of repetition were taken as a model for Christian churches. The form of worship in Christian churches almost entirely represents the course of repetition of the science dealing with the universe and man. Individual prayers, hymns, responses all had their own meaning in this repetition, as well as the holidays and the religious symbols. And their meaning has been forgotten long ago. Gigi, so the mystery schools there, the heart of these repetition schools, teaching these deep things in a rhythmic cycle, in a week, in a month, but all 10,000 years before Christ. How does this equate?
I would say, and I'm still learning so much about this because it's so deep. I mean, it's so deep that I can't pretend to like know everything. But I would say that Christ, the Christian mythos, or that is actually a cosmic event.
Right.
So it's not just a man was born, did miracles, died on the cross, was resurrected. That's what we see. But it's also a cosmic event, which is the event of the sun, which is the basically all-knowing. It's not all-knowing, but it's an advanced being. It's an advanced entity being born into, very high initiate, being born into the earth again and again, and not just necessarily one, but a stream of them. With maybe just before we go into the Kali Yuga cycle, or just before we go into the darkest night, maybe the best one comes in, something like that, right? But, we have the same story again and again and again, because it's talking about lineages that are, I would say, very advanced, that has to do with the incarnation of the energy of the sun, which is also why we call it the sun. And so this is what I feel like this story, and what happens when this happens, what happens to humanity when that happens. The sphere originally did switch. The way I see it is actually in Atlantis. That's when I see the original switching occurring, and the original sort of that mythos beginning. For me personally, that's where I see that.
Yeah.
And it sort of evolving every era in a new and different way, the way it needs to. And so that's how I think that's what real Christian mysticism is the exploration of that. And that's what the churches have forgotten. Even though the repetition has kept it alive, we have forgotten that. So
fascinating. They still have the actions, they can still go through the motions, and that has a certain impact anyway, but they've forgotten what they mean.
Yeah, well, they've forgotten. You could argue that the most important part of spirituality is the deep esoteric root, because that's where the truth is. When you lose that tradition, when you lose that mythos, you see what's happening now in many churches, which they don't look like anything like they used to. Anything like it was started from.
Oh yeah.
Oh
my God, yeah. So many of them have become about harvesting their flock. And I'll tell you what's interesting about all this, because of course we go deep on the Atlantis subject for the X shows, because the X steganography goes back into that Atlantean period, and we have the great information from the mystery schools that are public, like Theosophy and Anthroposophy and Cayce's work, which give us a whole view on what was happening there. But one of the things that's talked about that really got me thinking when you were giving your version of how it related to the sun was about the story of Rata, who is an earlier incarnation of Edgar Cayce, who's this incredible high priest who kind of builds that bridge between the failing Atlantis and the blossoming Egypt. And interestingly enough, in Cayce's readings dealing with the Gobi, the lost city of the Gobi, which we're going to get into here, he talks about Rata visiting there, and also how this prince from the Gobi Desert, Lost City, comes to Egypt. So there's this interplay there where they're saving knowledge for civilization later. They would portray Rata later in Egypt as this. And what has he got over his head, Gigi? It's a huge sun disk.
It's a huge sun disk, and they're trying to tell us something there, that he has achieved that initiation. He is the sun. He is of the sun. He's achieved that success.
Right.
And so now he's coming down and teaching, right? If you've achieved that initiation, then you come down and you teach. And that's what they're talking. That's what I mean when I'm saying the sun is incarnating, is there's certain initiations that one goes through, and that's showing that he's achieved something. And there he is again with his,
there's the disc.
There's his sun disk, and that's saying that he's of a certain mind, he's of a certain quality, and that's what that says to me.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think that when you've tuned into this and really worked with it, you said what it is actually about is something that you're calling an eighth chakra.
Yes. So the really interesting thing is that we pay attention to our 7 chakras, because those are sort of our 3D material chakras that give us the perception that we have, that they kind of blend together and give us our perception. And what's really interesting is we actually have an 8th chakra, which is a higher chakra that contains all 7 of the chakras, and it works through the heart chakra. So it overlaps and envelops all chakras, but it harmonizes through the heart chakra. And that's why you see Christ with his heart, is because he's showing with his gold disc, he's showing, okay, my 8th chakra is activated. I've achieved this initiation. I've done this before. I'm a master. And he's holding his heart to say, this is the way. So even though you're looking at a painting of him with his sacred heart and his gold chakra open, if you look at that with a mystical eye and think of the initiation that his soul has been through, you're not only getting what his soul has done by the sun disk, you're also getting how his energy body works and our way out, which is through the heart, because he's a master of the heart, right? That's what this whole lineage is about, is getting that heart chakra going, the heart working, so that we can get through, pop into that 8th chakra and go into the next level. So he's actually showing a precise level of activation of our etheric bodies to get through this in that art. It's actually very precise.
Wow. Incredible. You know, it's amazing because the Rata imagery comes out of this period that Cayce refers to, 10,500 BC, which is the period that researchers like Graham Hancock have said the Sphinx was built to look out at Leo, which makes sense because, of course, he's a lion. So we're getting, and Cayce and Gurdjieff are talking about this pre-Sans Egypt, and Gurdjieff saying, look, they had repetition schools. This became the mystery schools. They come out and they teach these things in cycles and go away. This is the mystery school thing. But Gigi, it's a 10,000-year program from Rata to Christ. That's a long time.
It's a very long time. I forgot to mention that the 8th chakra is gold. For those that may be wondering, that's why it's a gold thing, and Gobi and everything. So yeah, the 10,000-year cycle is a whole. Is that would that be like the Christ procession?
Yeah. Yes. Excellent point. Right. Exactly.
So it has its own cycle, and then before, it's kind of like how I intuitively see it, is before the darkest night, you get the brightest sun.
Right.
You get the most powerful initiate, and then, but it's all a program of these levels of initiates coming in. That's at least how I'm just learning, but that's how I see it. And then I guess it could be 10,000 years. That's many different eras and expressions of that as the world needs, giving all of the codes and teachings for that time. And we see that actually in Egypt. We see Christ characters in Zoroastrianism. We see it all over in we do see them around. So
it is. It's like an archetype of a savior coming through and rescuing humanity and giving it that road, that pathway out.
Yeah.
That's really interesting about the gold part and the 8th chakra. It comes into play here. I'm going to do one more thing about Atlantis here with Christ and all that, because this gets very, very interesting. And I'm glad that you brought up the Christ procession, because what Cayce says in relation to Christ is that he took the degrees of the White Brotherhood, which is the master mystery school, and the reference to white being the white aura of the group. And that he takes those vows in the Great Pyramid, in the empty sarcophagus of the Great Pyramid, and essentially dies in the initiation. And for 3 days, just like Christ will resurrect after the 3rd day. And he goes in and he does this initiation ritual in the Great Pyramid. There is Christ, before he comes out and does his ministry, in the Great Pyramid, taking that last of the initiate vows with the Great White Brotherhood. So this is the culmination, since Rata builds the pyramid in 10,500 BC. And then we have Christ coming in. It is in fact a procession. You're absolutely right.
I see. See, I didn't catch that. I didn't know that was the. Okay, I see. So they're always building something. The other person picks it up.
Yeah.
They do their thing for their specialty era, their age, and then they leave it for the other person. And it's like a procession building on top of everyone, building on top of the last.
Right.
Hopefully you get a good previous entity there for you to pick up from.
Exactly. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here with Gigi Young. Gigi is an amazing intuitive and has worked with us on extensive things. She, though, has been doing work for close to a decade on her own channel. And you're doing a course now, Gigi, at gigiyoung.com. And the course is for people who want to go into that next level of doing intuitive work.
Yes, I also teach. You too can be in connection with your intuition. So I have Inner Mystic, which is, for people who just want to begin, and I do that with you. It's all video courses. You can do it at your own pace. There's live Q&As. We get to hang out and talk about your development. I have Psychic Protection as well, which is another course to address all of those scary thoughts you have about your own intuition. We can talk about those. And then I also have another one coming out next week, which is actually all of the intuitive exercises and really just deepening that process and giving you the techniques to receive. So it's all over the website. You can just check it out.
Amazing. Olivia's diving into that as we speak, right? We know you're going to love that. Olivia, how are you doing out there?
Good. I have a couple questions.
Yes, please.
Okay, so Boat Krills wanted to know, is that Saturn or our sun now?
Oh, isn't that interesting? He picked up on that.
Isn't that interesting? So yeah, the spheres actually change. You're correct. The spheres actually change in influence. We have kind of past spheres and future spheres, and Saturn was a previous influence, but that's not the influence that is working today. Some people certainly think that it is because they've lost their perception. But the sun that I'm talking about is not that sun. It's the sun.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
absolutely.
The one that actually makes everything green and grow and feeds us and gives us. It's that sun.
The true solar.
The one that rises every day and yeah, that one.
Not the evil black sun. Let's be straight about that.
Let's get it.
Another question?
Well, actually, let's keep rolling, and then we're going to get to questions.
Well, this
ahead.
Involves, okay. So a cult fan wanted to know, is the sun disk akin to a halo?
A cult fan, I haven't heard from you since the Graham Hancock event. It was good to see you out there.
Yeah.
Is it akin to a halo, Gigi?
I would say that it is. I mean, the sun has a halo when we look at it. I think that there's signaling there, and the 8th chakra is golden. It resonates with the high esoteric sun. So the high sun, the spiritual quality of the sun. And it encompasses all of us, all of our entire being, just like the sun encompasses the entire earth and nourishes the entire earth. So does that aspect of our chakra. And so I would say that it definitely is. Some artistry really shows it as obviously solar, and golden, and then some is a bit more depending on the artist. But
and this is the auric thing. They're showing the auric pattern, and when you are a figure on the level of Christ, that's going to be something that somebody can depict because you're literally glowing on a certain level.
right, if you're attuned, you're going to be able to see what initiations people have gone through in their soul, and you can pick out people who are awakened to certain things, and you know that's what the art is trying to do. It's showing what he's achieved as a soul. So
Wow.
they do this all the time in art. The mystery schools do this all the time. They reveal the initiations for people to pick up. It's right in our face.
How did the artists know to represent the gods and the goddesses that way?
Part of it is their own intuition and their own ability to remember. And then part of the artists are initiates, and it's part of their service of giving back to the world is to reveal these in their own beautiful way. And that's their service. And so they're of service when they're doing that. And that's part of, now how they do that is their own, right? It's their own way, but they're also doing a service to us. It's their way.
Wow, fascinating. You know, it's all interesting because, of course, one of the trademarks of Steiner and Cayce when they're young children is they can see those energy fields around people. In their autobiographies, this is one of the first thing that jumps out, is that when I was a very young child, I could see those energy patterns around people. They're coming in programmed for this, Gigi.
Yeah, exactly. And you can feel them too. Like for me, I feel the color gold. Like it's a feeling for me. And then you can create maybe music from that feeling. And other people who feel will get the message. So there's lots of different ways to communicate something. But yeah, definitely the artist, especially like when Steiner's drawing all of those colorful visions of these beings, he's showing what their powers are and what they're rooted in, what their initiations are, who they are. It's not just like he was, randomly inspired. It's information.
Well, I guess now we know why the New York Times targeted him.
Yeah, I mean,
They don't want that to get out.
You don't want everybody doing that. Then they wouldn't be able to do their dirty deeds in the day.
Dirty deeds of the day, 3D.
Not even at night. And it's not even at night anymore. It's
right,
during the
exactly.
day.
Yeah. Not to be under cover of night. They're broadcasting right at the crack of dawn, or at the crack of noon, as they say. Here's an interesting thing. What we're going to do, we're going to jump into Edgar Cayce, who plays a big part in the Lost Gobi City line. But we've seen that Gurdjieff has referenced it, and in Meetings with Remarkable Men, talks about this incredible expedition there with Professor Skridlov and a cast of characters. And like I said, Prince Lubavetsky kind of leads him. And it's Mr. X, Pogosian, who he refers to as Mr. X, that leads him to the information to get to the Sarmoon Brotherhood. We're getting some idea here. The mystery schools, the Gobi City, the Sarmoon Brotherhood. Before we get to the Cayce readings, Gigi, there was something about the Gobi in this Gobi Desert lost city, which you had described that Gurdjieff was actually referring to something that you saw as almost like a tear in time, and that they were being blocked by these kind of Ahrimanic forces from entering there. This is something that came as like a subtext of this journey to the Gobi. It's very interesting to me because in the book, Gurdjieff talks about meeting people from the Essene Brotherhood. Now, the Essene Brotherhood is the brotherhood that Christ came out of with John the Baptist, and that Edgar Cayce had done a series of readings on, and they did not know about the Essene Brotherhood until they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And Cayce had said women were in these mystery schools of the Essenes, and everyone laughed at those readings and said they never would allow in any mystical Jewish tradition the women to be involved. And when they dug up the area of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found women and men. So But here's Gurdjieff talking about how he's meeting people from this Essene Brotherhood, and Gurdjieff, Cayce has assured us that their job was to create Christ, was to create that channel through the mystery schools, the school of the prophets, Elijah, and all the rest of it, leading on through this lineage from King David all the way to Christ. And that then the Essene schools, which practice numerology, astrology, they were kind of absorbed into that esoteric Christianity. But here's Gurdjieff talking about meeting with someone from this Essene Brotherhood. There's a time tear in there. He's again engaging. It's almost like he's walking up to a figure from 2,000 years ago and saying, I had a conversation with him. What kind of symbolism is to be had from that?
And he was in the Gobi when he did it?
This is just before he goes to the Gobi.
Well, I think that they're interdimensional beings with interdimensional abilities.
Yes.
And so I think that when you're at that level, you can have visitations from interdimensionals, people from different, even just telepathically. But yeah, you have meetings with soul groups that you are on missions with and helpers and everything like that. Very.
Wow. Fascinating. More imagery in Gurdjieff's writing. In the Cayce readings, something very unusual happens when a guy who's about 45 comes in, and he's a lawyer in New York on Wall Street. And he wants a series of readings. He says, all my life, I've drawn these symbols, and I've been kind of spiritually inspired, but I've lived my life predominantly as this kind of Wall Street guy. So he comes in, and when he comes in, Gladys Davis, who takes down all the readings, she notes something about him that he looked very Chinese, remarkably so, considering he had no such physical heritage. It's very interesting. So Cayce starts to talk to him and give him some idea of his past life. He said, the entity was a prince of that land, this high land civilization, sending to the various lands for the messages that were being given by the teachers, making for a betterment of the peoples. The entity in the name then Muzuen, that's M-U-Z-U-E-N. He's the prince of this Gobi lost land. Came to be the ruler or the leader of. During those activities, the entity, many were the warnings this entity gave to those peoples for their rebellious influence that arose that later made for devastating influences of the sands overcovering much of this Gobi land, making it sound like it's a nuclear desert almost, Gigi, right off the bat.
Yeah. So the way that I saw it was we're talking about building to the sky. That's a portal. That's a vortex. That's an X. Mm-hmm. So we're building to the sky. There's battling over that type of power. You have these portals being created and people both sides want those. So the Belial group, the darker groups, they want to hijack those portals and use them to do their things and bring in darker beings, harmonic beings, things like that, and kind of plunge the earth deeper into a more dense reality. But the other groups are trying to build upwards. So the Belial's trying to build downwards into that dark sun, Saturn, Mars chain of the past that just gets you denser and denser and denser. And then we have the Emilius group or the higher group that's trying to build to the sky. And there's battles going on over who is going to control the work that's being done there. And the Gobi is special in that how it works is that the earth will tell the Emilius group, the higher groups like a Yardang, they'll tell where to build to the sky. So they'll tell you need to build here, and the earth will let them know, and they'll start trying to build that acupuncture point. So eventually the earth is just a higher part of a higher density, and we're reunited with our higher self, essentially. And
yeah, they'll get that message where to build the sacred center, for example.
The sacred center is important. It's like an acupuncture point. It's like this is where it's supposed to be. This is where it is. This is a significant place because everything on a higher realm is mirrored here. And so you got to build that at right time and everything. And so they're battling over that. And things can happen in certain ways where you can use a weapon in a certain way at the right time, and you can actually create a huge rift, and explosions can be even worse, and you can rip time, and you can use all of that good technology for bad, which is what happened in the Gobi when these battles were going. It's actually, the way that I saw it almost seemed worse than an atomic bomb. Like, the atomic bomb is actually too messy for what was going on there. This was much more like, I don't know how to explain it, but what I saw was that it actually affected like time and space in such a much more significant way.
Yeah.
Certainly it was probably like some kind of atomic weaponry, but it was almost worse.
Wow. Yeah, almost worse. And it creates a total desert in this case, like in the case of Atlantis, complete submersion,
Right.
submerging a continent below the Atlantic Ocean. And the echo from that, this apothegm that they hide, that they kind of keep under wraps so that we can't get to that position where it's used again. You bring up portals a lot, and I'm glad that you do, because that has to play into this more as we talk about it. And I think that just some kind of an understanding of portals as a kind of a cosmic gateway, and that there are certain parts of the earth that work better magnetically for bringing in this kind of higher influence. That's really interesting, because of course we have all those surveys about ley lines and how they put Cape Canaveral, for example, on a ley line in New York City, and even Harvard over here. I think we start to get an idea about places that gives us an idea that, that point where the pyramids are, where the Sphinx are, that's not a random spot. It's quite an important spot to be able to place those buildings.
Yes, and the serpent mounds, things like that. It's like, why did they build that in the middle of Ohio? Or why is it the shape of a snake? Like, why that? Like this, like we're befuddled at why they would build these certain types of things, and why the way that they're built has changed. Why is this more of like an earthwork, and why is this more of a pyramid? Well, because they knew of an art form that was multi-dimensional, and they were functioning from a place of multi-dimensionality. So they were, thinking, how can we bridge heaven and earth all the time? And and what is the way to build it for this time? Maybe it's a pyramid, maybe it's a mound. Where is it? Where do we do that? How do we prevent the fall? How do we store the wisdom? How do we save the knowledge? How do we do this all the time, era after era after era? And that's what's going on. And some of it does involve portals too. Lesser portals, greater portals, portals that open at certain times, portals that close. This is a whole thing that we have to kind of start getting a handle on.
Yeah. Wow, it's fascinating. And I do feel that there's a lot of work overlapping here, because if I listen to, for example, the work that Graham Hancock is doing, and then I think about what you're saying about portals, those areas of research are coming closer and closer, Gigi. It's now we're starting to see that these things merge. The more someone actually does the research on the ground, what they're going to come to the conclusion of, if they're looking for lost civilization, is that civilization possessed the ability to understand the relationship between earth and sky, earth and the heavens, and that kind of higher influence that comes down here. And when they get into that, it's almost like the research brain gets to a certain point and can't go any further. And they have to have that breakthrough of what the ancient culture had, which is the higher understanding that blows past just our kind of more scientific mind, or scientific materialism mind.
They have to let go of their language.
Yes.
They have to let go of their language and learn another language, because we used to all speak the same language. So we have to get that back. And it's not like we have to relearn it, we have to remember it. So that's what they have to let go of their materialism and start to open up to something that they already were. So that's important too.
Wow, absolutely. Everyone, it's fantastic to have you here. We're deep into episode 57 of the X series, dealing with Gurdjieff and the Gobi in mystical pre-Sands Egypt, which we're getting a real crisscross between Steiner, Cayce, and Gurdjieff on this. And the fourth way aspect is the one we're bringing out tonight with Gigi Young. Miss Olivia, how are you doing?
Aether wanted to know, what was Gurdjieff's relationship with the Sufis? Could it be possible his ultimate purpose was to find a common bond between the Gobi lost civilization, ancient Egypt, and Atlantis?
Wow. Well, listen, Atlantis is featured very prominently in Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, which is definitely much harder to read than Meetings with Remarkable Men. Meetings with Remarkable Men gives you this incredible story, this epic story of his bio and these expeditions and the mystery schools, but it's written in an incredible fashion. I mean, it's like the ultimate novel in some ways, but it's true. Now, the other aspect with Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, it's intentionally obscuring its meaning. And the book is completely allegorical. It's got Beelzebub visiting the solar system and taking a look at these beings. And he comes in early on and he watches them in Atlantis and he sees how they operate. And then he comes back later and even joins them in the 40s and watches them. And all the time he's talking to his grandson about the developments on Earth. It's an incredibly epic book, but there's no doubt that Gurdjieff was bringing these things together. One of the things that you understand about the fourth way is that over here, a long time ago, they had to break up the mystery schools. And the way that he describes it is they broke up philosophy in one, they broke up theory over here, they broke up practice over here. And so those schools operating in India, Egypt, and Persia, they couldn't be united, because when they were united, there was the possibility that if they got struck down, one of them, they would lose it. But if they were split up in this way, then they could develop independently and they would stay safe. So it is quite possible what you're saying that he was doing there. And Gigi, this idea of bringing the knowledge back together now, this is what the mystery schools were doing. This is what people like Steiner gave his life for, if you think about it. Really being out there, really being under fire. And as we know, Steiner was incredibly targeted. Blavatsky was incredibly targeted. If we think about entire groups trying to put her in occult imprisonment, and the kind of travails of people like Annie Besant and certainly Cayce himself, these people got together and they gave us this tradition. We have the thread from the mystery schools, but we have to have the courage to bring it forward in the 21st century.
Yes, exactly. And it's hard if you look at like the last 100 years or so, like a wood chipper. Like that's kind of what has happened a lot, to the mysteries. We just have all these bits and pieces everywhere, and that's what it was meant to be, is basically a wood chipper for spirituality. And so we need to get our mysteries back, and start bringing them into every aspect of life, and not being afraid to talk about them, and also start giving credit to the people who brought these things forward. Because like, as you're saying, like I had no idea that Blavatsky basically brought yoga to the West. I'm a huge yogi. I do yoga almost every day. I had no idea that it was Theosophy and that movement that brought it there. And now, if you think of it like the last 100 years as a wood chipper and as a distorter, you know what? You're not going to get perfect people that bring forward the perfect message. We're all human, right?
Right.
But you can see that what they've deposited has a huge impact on society. And like you said, biodynamic gardening, Waldorf schools, like there's all these things that are kind of like keeping spirituality like on life support, especially here in the West.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to acknowledge where we are with what we have and who's done that, and then say, how can we expand on this? How can we bring it forward for this time? Like you were saying, the Christ mythos, and that how can we bring the original understanding back? And I think that's really where we are.
Wow, it's fascinating because, of course, the churches have a version of Christ, but the mystery school esoteric Christianity includes reincarnation. It includes this larger cosmology that's not there, that's missing in the traditional church version of it. So we have quite a disconnect there in public with it. It's an excellent point. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Fascinating here in episode 57 of the X series on Gurdjieff and the Gobi. I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That keeps us in touch. It's an incredible throwdown in social media with people getting knocked down left and right. And of course, that means left and right channels. It's not just that they're going after conservatives. I mean, they're just after everyone now. It's absurd. And it's so absurd that it's just like, the gorilla's out of the closet and destroying everything left and right. So now we can see it. It's not a rumor anymore. So the only way to really guarantee that we have that back and forth is to make sure you're in there with the newsletter. That's a free newsletter, and it keeps you up to date on events that we have coming up and the guests that we're going to have, like we have Gigi Young right now, and all the exciting X shows that we have coming up for you, including Catherine Austin Fitz later this month. So you definitely want to have that newsletter. Go to the site, Dark Journalist, and subscribe to the site. We've made it incredibly affordable. So it's, it's something that when you're getting behind the good things that are out there, this is an important thing because you are making the change. You're making the difference. So I'm always pointing to the great things that are out there when people come to me and they're like, did you see what the blue chickens did? Or, these horrible forces that we see out there from that end of the spectrum, and then on the other side, we have this TTSA money marketing op, and then, the Wilcock junk. So you get all that with Fulford, and, there's cabal arrests, and Soros is going to prison on a barge, and all this fantasy stuff. It's not happening. But we do have real people in the space. We do have Catherine Austin Fitz. We do have Gigi Young. We do have Olivia. So we have the ability to bring these things forward. So get behind the shows that are good. Support what we're doing here at Dark Journalist. Subscribe to the show. And I'll tell you one thing, which is being a subscriber this year, especially with things we're doing in relation to the X series and the Hot Zone this summer, you're going to want to be a part of that and the exciting events we have coming up for you. Okay, before I jump on this reading of this lawyer who was a prince in the Gobi land, and where Cayce tells us all about the lost city of gold inside the Gobi. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Okay, I'll just throw this one out there. Philip Blair wanted to know, is there a Gurdjieff ufology connection?
Well, look, in the entire book of Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, he is in a spacecraft and he's visiting Earth. So there's certainly incredible crossover. Now, Gurdjieff died in 1949, and they had just kind of gotten into the UFO files. So they don't talk about UFOs as such. They do talk about other cultures, and the way that it's represented is, very often in the Gurdjieff work, it's all very practical work. So that, the big problem that they had with theosophy was, oh, listen, these people, they understand this idea of ascended masters, and they just go off thinking in their minds about ascended masters, and they start to think, well, I'm ascended and all this stuff. And in the meantime, they're not doing any personal work on themselves. And so the Gurdjieff work was a great corrective to that. Just like if he was around right now and you talked about UFO disclosure, he would be like, why don't you go outside and dig a ditch? Make yourself useful physically and get out of your head and and there's some wisdom in this, Gigi, which is we have to balance these things out somehow, but still take in the higher concepts. And I think that the danger that was happening with theosophy, which Gurdjieff was kind of an antidote to, was people were moving into fantasy realms.
That's the whole thing, is that you can use spirituality as an escape.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very, very different than using spirituality as a way to live.
Aha. Just like we see now when people are like, oh, yeah, well, I don't believe your thing. I'm going into 5D and I'll leave you back there in 3D. And I'll be up here in the heavens and looking down at you. And they've lost the whole lesson right in the middle of it because they discovered the term 5D.
That's exactly it. Spirituality is not a vacation. It's not something to avoid matter. It's something that you integrate into your body, and doing physical work's a really great way to see how integrated you are and to see how calm your mind is, to see how irritated you are. Try doing a menial task. You'll find out how spiritual you are.
Right. The patience aspect creeping in. What's fascinating too is, and I want to put this across, which is that Bennett, who was one of the main students of Gurdjieff, and Ouspensky. He also studied with Ouspensky for 20 years. He's a remarkable guy, and we've done a show on him. J.G. Bennett's work is incredible. It's quite an inspiration. But he was all about work, and as Gurdjieff was, and he had seen him and operated with him, and he understood that those breakthroughs come from having a very good sense of physicality at times. But one of the things that he put across when talking about this was that the first rule he gave his students that is, if you discover things and you're working with the fourth way and you are on a more advanced consciousness level, that it's not an excuse to look down at people who are in everyday life and trapped in these stress cycles or trapped in anger or insecurity or whatever it happens to be, and say, aha, I found the fourth way and therefore I'm superior to these other people. It was just the opposite. The whole idea was to make yourself a better channel to help other people. Is that how you see it pretty much?
Oh, that's it. I mean, when you really connect with spirits and you're truly connecting in a big way, you realize that it's all about service because we're all interconnected. That's what you realize. And if you don't realize that, then you are not connecting. That's where it leads you. And that's where we get those virtues that we're supposed to follow, is because they're trying to tell you how to hold that kind of energy in your body, is to live a certain way so you can hold that energy. And you have certain thoughts and things like that. And also there's the mastership issue, which is until you've raised someone to your level, you're not going anywhere. So you can just think that you're above everybody all day long if you want, but you're trapping yourself in the ego. So that's what you end up doing.
Thank God I have a supreme higher consciousness, Gigi. That's all I can say.
Thank God.
Unbelievable. Everyone, we're going to get to your questions here shortly. Miss Olivia is ready for you. Ask the questions in caps, and we're going to get Gigi to answer a bunch of those for us tonight. I want to get into this reading. This is a very important reading, which reveals the lost city in the Gobi. Now it's Cayce. Okay. Now Gurdjieff has told us it was there, and there was an expedition around it. Now Cayce is giving us some information, and it's coming from his readings at first with this Wall Street lawyer, oddly enough. Quite a shock for him. Okay. And oddly enough, even though he was a regular kind of Wall Street lawyer, white guy, he looked Asian. So this was a past life, Gigi, coming through, apparently.
Yeah.
Period.
That's what can happen. A lot of the times you do carry not only personality characteristics, but physical characteristics of that life.
Very interesting to consider. Now, this is in 1936, he gives this reading. And he says, yes, we have the records here of this entity. And in the experience before as Muzuan, the son of Mu, in that experience as the prince in the Gobi land. I want to mention here that James Churchward in the 1920s was an archaeologist who went deep into the East to Tibet and other places. And he found in those church records of those schools and monasteries up there, this word Mu, M-U. And Mu was the name of that motherland in the Pacific, which is the complement to Atlantis in the Atlantic. And Mu is called Lemuria also. Mu is kind of the short form, apparently. And Mu means motherland. So Cayce's talking here about the king named Mu, and this is his son, this prince named Muzuan. Now, there's some very strange physical characteristics about Muzuan, Gigi, that I want you to chime in on, but let me read this first and we'll jump into it. These experiences become rather hard to indicate in the present language and status of activities of individuals in those experiences. In giving that, it may be helpful in giving the influence of that experience on the present entity. It is well that we turn rather to a moment in the records of that land as a whole, without respect to a personality, but more as a histology or history, in which the environment, the entity, the son of Mu, who was called Mizuan, came in that experience. The land was among those in which there was the first appearance of those that were as separate entities, or souls disentangling themselves from material, or what we know of as material associations. That's very interesting, but I'm going to keep going. Now, for the projections of those had come from those influences that were termed Lemur, or Lemurian, or the land of Mu. There's a big point in the Cayce readings that he says these souls come down at a certain point and project themselves into matter, and that a lot of it, where their attention and their desire goes, they wind up, and they will hover over different things in nature, but at a certain point, the thought projections become kind of a corrupt, more greedy process, let's say. That is, this is a kind of a larger cosmology based around this idea of the fall and all the rest of it. Cayce doesn't have it that way. He has it as they see something they like and they project into it. So they're getting trapped in matter based on how they project themselves in. So he's saying that this land of the Gobi, coming out of the Lemurian experience, they are actually able to now improve from that whole lesson. They're the first kind of pure group out of this. And then he says, these then we find in that period when there was the choice of the soul that became in its final earthly experience the savior in the earthen dwellings, or those as man sees as comprehends the children of men. The land under these influences of Mu became as what would be termed in the present as among the highest state of advancement in material accomplishments for the benefit of conveniences for man's indwelling, or the less combative influence of the elemental, or of that as man knows in nature as the raw. What he's saying here is they had achieved this incredibly high technology like Atlantis. And he talks about them having airships. He talks about them having electricity. He talks about them having these incredible abilities with this city of gold. And it sounds highly technological. So let's keep rolling. Now, so he says the highest state of advancement in there. I think we have to keep that in mind because later on he's going to say that they were the highest spiritually also. So we're going to have to see that they had that balance very much like the Amelius group. Okay. Long story short. Okay, so he says that Mizuan then, all of these had been and were in use by those people under this environment. When the entity entered the experience, a period that collaborated or made these collaborations with the teachings of Sanid, Rata, and Og. There's that crisscross, Gigi, where the Lost City of Gold now has this Rata link. And actually, Rata will show up visiting there and maybe giving them a kind of a background. The entity Mizuan, or son of Mu, was the prince that grew under those influences for the leadership, the directing of those peoples in the experience, or the prince of that land. And he said that the sexes were equal in the Lost City of Gold, in the Gobi. And so they had equality there. Everyone worked. So there was a kind of a premise about everyone working, and there's a common storehouse. And the other thing I think that's unusual is they're monogamous, which in that period, we have a long time through the Bible before anybody becomes monogamous. So here they already have that. And then he says, the beginning of the buildings of the Temple of Gold, its beams, its walls, its paneling, its many-colored polished metals and woods. The entity and its associations, by the heralding of this union of purpose with the varied centers, proclaimed by Rata, journeyed forth into other lands of various groups. A description of the entity and of the household of the ruling forces comes. Stature, he would be 5 feet 11 inches tall, blue of eye, hair dark gold, 6-fingered, 5-toed. He's describing him with blue skin. In dress, leather, linen, cotton, and silk. But did you catch something interesting there? 6 fingers, Gigi.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So the finger thing refers to what kind of density dimension that you're originating in.
Aha.
That's what that shows. Because sometimes people will be like, they'll see those gray entities and they'll be like, have like 4 fingers in the picture. That's trying to say that that's their highest reach, or their root is their conscious rooting is, that's where it is. So that's what he's saying there when you
Wow.
mention because we're all made in the image, but we're also revealing what density we're based in, we're rooted in.
It's fascinating. I'm getting something unusual about the leadership group that's setting up the Gobi Lost City. First of all, they're using gold extensively. We know that Krishna is often portrayed with blue skin. Olivia, you like those pictures of
Very
Krishna?
much so.
Yeah,
Mhm.
fascinating. Later on, Cayce goes on to say, a whole city, yes, a temple, will be uncovered, as will be the lost city of gold in the Gobi land. There's a city of gold, according to Cayce, in the Gobi. This is the same thing Professor Skridlov was looking at. Why gold, Gigi? Why is it made of gold?
Yeah, well, the blue skin thing, I've seen the blue skin thing a lot coming from the inner earth.
Okay.
In vision, so that's interesting. And the gold thing, well, the gold I think is referencing everything we were just talking about like the quality of that chakra and all of that in the sun. It's connecting with that energy. The gold is also a technology in itself as well.
Yeah. Wow, it's really interesting. Back up for a minute. You have had your own visions then of this blue skin thing. What does it represent? Because I remember you talking about the Venus beings and how they had their actual blood was almost like
Yeah, it bothered me for a long time. I used to always have this vision and I could never place it. It was like the same, it was sometimes several different visions, but I always had like this blue skin. And I was always coming up from the earth and kind of being chased and being hunted down. And I would try and run and run and run and run. And I remember they liked to drown them. It was almost like a way of saying, like, I'm drowning you in your own thing. Like, you're water people, or there's something about your culture that's really about water. Your religion is water. Your magic is to do with water. So we're going to drown you. And that was what they loved to do. And that's also why they drown witches. That's where I believe that came from, just from my memories and going back to that. And so I think there was a period of time where the kind of Venusian chain of development that connects with the Pleiades and that whole system, I think that when they came in to our reality, I think they had blue skin for a long time. Or there's something about the where they were in their density, wherever they're from, when they came in, they still retained a lot of that appearance, but then over time, I don't think that they really have it anymore. I know that they don't have it anymore. But so it's kind of like a very specific point. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's the cultural memory. There's some echo back there of these blue-skinned people, but you were getting that it was related to a Venus portal, those beings coming in, being advanced.
Yeah, that was my impression. I've never heard anybody like say that. So, but that was my
It's very unique, absolutely.
Yeah, and so, but that was like my impression. It was, and I remember just being there to help. Like, I remember just being like, these people, and I remember the projection thing that you were talking about as well. I actually specifically remember walking around and seeing big black monkey statues everywhere, like carved dark. I don't know if they're like obsidian or what they were, but they were everywhere. And I remember walking through and everybody was lost. And I remember, you know, and then it was those memories. So we weren't doing anything. I didn't have any weapons, you know, like I wasn't part of that, you know, yeah, I remember that, the blue skin, the Venusian, Pleiadian.
You felt like the group was hunted.
Yeah, we were definitely hunted. lots of turmoil, didn't want this future chain sphere of planets incarnating to essentially challenge them and it influence people back into their heart. They didn't want that. They wanted to maintain their level of destruction that they had, essentially their darkness. And so we're still in that. It's a little different, but
yeah, we are, and they're still hunting this time. Now they use the New York Times.
yeah.
Fascinating. You know, I have to say, we're definitely gonna do something specifically on these physical characteristics, because you've come up with some interesting things about this, which we can't go into too deep yet. But I do feel that the physical, apprehending their physical characteristics and why they might appear in this fashion and what's going on in relation to that and copper, I think it's very, very interesting stuff to get into. One thing I want to point out, in speaking of a lost Gobi city, how about we show you one? let's see if this will pick up, actually, because it's light. But this is a news story that's been all over, about a structure that they found in the Gobi using the satellite, and they don't know what it is, and China won't let anyone near it to get a really good look at it. This is, let's see if we get it. That's kind of good, maybe even further back. So it's these interconnecting lines that have been seen on satellite right in the southern portion of the Gobi Desert. Now, I think what we can see about them immediately is they hold this kind of pattern that is definitely a conscious pattern. In other words, it's not a random pattern. But they can't figure out why they shine out from under the sand. Gigi, do you think we're looking at the lost city of the Gobi here?
Yeah, I think we're looking. I mean, it's a pattern of what looks like roadways or tracks in the desert. So I think we're looking at the city in the Gobi.
Unbelievable. It does. It looks like a cityscape. And what I get the most when I look at this is the references that they were saying, you know, first of all, in looking at this, looking down at it, they shouldn't be able to see this. So they don't expect that it's there, and it's massive. And over and over again in the Cayce readings, when he gets around to this, Gigi, he says, which will be discovered. This will be discovered. He did suggest also that the Hall of Records was going to be discovered. It looks like we're in this period, because, again, when we open up these things, we're talking about the advances in the hot zone. If we find that whole civilization down there, it's getting harder to hide it. And it's getting harder to hide the battle over it, too. We have sanctions on Cuba, for heaven's sake. So we have that going on. But here on this other side of the world, this lost city of the Gobi, and here's the weird thing about it. In these readings, and in this reading, the 1554 reading, and the other one is the 877 series. He's saying that there's more gold in the lost city of gold than in the world's circulation. He also suggested that there was incredible gold in relation to Bimini. So we have this gold crossover whenever we're talking about what's hidden here. Is this part of the punchline, which is they want to hide the history, they want to hide the city, but this massive amount of gold, is this another extraordinary temptation on their part to hide what they're looking for? Absolutely.
And I think that both sides want to use that for something different, and that's, one wants to hoard it away and be greedy and continue with the same domination plans that they need to do. And then others have different goals with it that are higher. So
no question. Wow, amazing. It's fascinating too. I do want to say Gurdjieff and Cayce crossover, Steiner and Cayce crossover, Theosophy crossover. It's so interesting when they overlap, and the Gobi city is something that Cayce and Gurdjieff specifically overlap on. They're the ones who talk about it. So that, I think, is a hint there also, which is we're getting two sides of the mystery schools coming in and pointing to this spot. I want to go to Gurdjieff for a minute and the Enneagram. The Enneagram is indeed something directly out of this Sarmun Brotherhood that Gurdjieff was a part of. Now, we know there have been kind of pop culture references to how the Enneagram, you can select your type, and Oscar Acaso came out and trademarked his version of the Enneagram and said, hey, I found it, I didn't get it through Gurdjieff. It was my own thing. And people have done these ridiculous things. Gurdjieff was the first one to bring it out as early as 1914 in the West. So nobody, anyone who tried to trademark it later in the 60s or whatever, Claudio Naranjo and those people who came out and said, oh yeah, I got it. It was in South America and I found it. No, Gurdjieff brought it forward. But the symbol itself, Gigi, what are we looking at here?
Whenever I look at it, I see it as moving. Whenever I see that, I always see it as like moving and oscillating, I guess, because every symbol has like a higher dimensional aspect. But I also see it as like a dial describing reality. It's a way of kind of geometrically and numerically describing our reality. Like the different kind of dimensions, our mind, our body. It's sort of just like a key. It's a key.
It's a key.
The raids, it's a key.
When he finds the logo inside the book for the Sarmun Brotherhood, we see the outline of the Enneagram there, but if we drew a triangle, we'd get those other three sides, which would give us the 9-point Enneagram. What does the triangle represent in relation to the rest of this? I'm going to flash this one more time. So here's the full image. There obviously is the triangle in the middle of it. Here it is, though. This is their actual logo without the triangle part. So it's 9-sided when you have the Enneagram, but then you have this. What does the triangle add?
My first impression is that the triangle makes it functional in this dimension. And it has to do with, because I tried to go through the other one and it didn't work, and then it worked when I tried to go through the triangle one. So I think that the triangle is an addition for after we fell. I think it works better. I think it makes the dial work. It makes the key work. And I think the previous one may have been one for a different time and a different energy on the planet. That's my first. That's my first read.
The name Sarmun means bee or keeper of bee honey. What's the reference?
Well, the bee has so many different, there's so many different ways you can go with it, but the bee I always kind of see it as the soul. And the honey is really significant because it's basically our wisdom. And it's also like a substance. It's kind of like ectoplasm. And mist in a way. Like it's kind of a substance too. And I see it as being generated in the human form, because sometimes my spirit guides are like, build the honey. They actually use that language. And what it means is that you have to pull cosmic spiritual energy that is information, it's healing, it's light. You pull that in, but it's raw. It's like pollen, right? It's raw. It's not honey yet. You got to pull that in. And what your body will do is it'll start merging all of that raw spiritual energy that's just patterns and forms, and it'll start making it into something that you can live in the world with. And it changes you and it kind of transforms you. And that's the honey, and that's what we use. And so when someone's the keeper of the honey, they're keeping the wisdom. They're keeping all of that raw energy that is just spirit, that's the pollen. And the people that do that and then they turn it into the honey, they're keeping that cosmic energy that's turned into wisdom. And so that's like the mystery schools, but we were just talking about how that's the throughway, that's the honey, that's what people have taken the pollen and turned it into the bees. Have taken that higher energy and turned it into something that's like honey. It's wisdom. It's in our it's even reflected in our chakra system, where we look at the solar plexus, the merging of the solar plexus and root chakra is the orange chakra, which is where we actually, that's the position where we actually have to pull the raw energy to get that. And so it's also a color thing. I know that was a lot.
No, it's actually quite interesting. You know, I was thinking of how they are different states. The pollen is a different state. The honey is a different state. The honeycomb that the bees are working with, you know, these are different levels. There's a great mystery to why Sarmoon means that, what they're trying to represent there. They're keeping, you know, keeper of the bees, keepers of the honey. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Philip Blair just said, I thought you'd be interested. The young man who disappeared in Brazil and left a statue of Giordano Bruno in his room, I think that symbol is drawn in his floor beneath the statue.
Oh, isn't that fascinating?
Oh.
Into that.
I'll give you another weird twist on Giordano Bruno, which is that at the end of their lives, you know, the Theosophists give their past lives. And Annie Besant's past life was Giordano Bruno. Very interesting. She never mentioned that during her regular life. Let's talk about the end of Gurdjieff's life. He'd come out of the mystery schools. He'd given this incredible fourth way doctrine through Ouspensky. And he had set up these groups, individual fourth way groups, and he had let out things like the stop exercise. And he had put together these incredible, the first time we'd ever seen this kind of thing in the West, of the Gurdjieff movements, the sacred movements, and how there were books encased inside of those movements. And it's another shot of these temple dancers. He had some controversies, which is, it doesn't seem, you know, it seemed like with Ouspensky and with Araj and other people, everyone seemed to end on kind of a bad note with him in some way or another. And, you know, in Ouspensky's case, it was a lifelong struggle between him and Gurdjieff to get his teaching, but not be subject to the kind of chaos around Gurdjieff. And again, you're dealing always with these individuals. But Ouspensky had come forward and said, you know, he came out of the mystery schools, and he definitely was something different, because there was nothing like him that I'd ever come across in all of my studies, he said. And he must have been some kind of experiment for them, letting him kind of go rogue and experiment. But he said that he felt that in the end that Gurdjieff could not communicate his teaching, that he did not get it fully out, and that he felt he couldn't help him do that. Gurdjieff's a very interesting and complex character. He gave us the information about the mystery schools. The mystery schools definitely assisted him, and at a certain point, he broke away on his own. And by the end of his life, he had come out to bring forward that fourth way teaching and give us these incredible answers through the Enneagram, and through his work with the fourth way and the whole doctrine of not being mechanical and not being asleep. How did this mystery school initiate do, Gigi?
I feel like it's actually so much harder to teach the really material, to really get people into their bodies. That's one of the hardest things to do.
Oh yeah.
It's easier to get people into fantasy and imagining past lives and kind of like almost getting out of their body. That's almost like why people go to spirituality, is to escape. And so I think it's a very difficult task to try to bring people to their spirits, but like be in your body too. That's really a difficult task. The trickster thing is also really hard, because you can admire that he didn't want people to get caught up on an identity. He didn't want people to know who he was. If he wanted to almost be whatever was best for that time, but it's incredibly difficult not to lose yourself
Oh yeah.
while you're doing that. And so it's a hard, enviable, but it's a hard approach.
Wow, it's amazing. Gurdjieff had said that everything is on a wheel of eyes, and that we have these different eyes, and that these movements from the outside world bring up a different eye out of ourselves, and we forget the eye that we were just an hour ago. And out of these different eyes, he taught this whole system about self-remembering. And Ouspensky had learned this system, and that at the end of his life, Ouspensky said, I came to realize that Gurdjieff, at the end of his life, well, we have so many eyes that he had boiled down his eyes to two, one very good and one very bad.
Well.
It was the final battle was with himself.
That's everybody.
But he gave us the incredible background of the Sarmung Brotherhood mystery teachings. He brought it into society in that sense, giving us that ability to connect with those truths coming forward out of the mystery schools and into the public, and really kind of rescuing us from the theosophical mystery school mess at the time, and bringing something new in and saying, what, if they're getting too into fantasy, let's deal with their body, and let's get them to really kind of take on this cosmology from the point of view of being very grounded. So there wasn't a lot of talk, like you said, about reincarnation and other things. But when you really look at the work of Gurdjieff with the whole cosmology and the multiple eyes and your chief feature and these different qualities that he talked about, it's a very kind of cosmic work in the final analysis.
Because everything's cosmic.
All right.
Everything is cosmic. At the end of the day, it's just different states of matter, basically. So he was just wanting people to, and if you think about it, if we're going into this wood chipper of 100 years, he's probably thinking like, I need to get these teachings as deeply embedded into people's bodies and their physicality. Like, I need to give them tools, because this fantasy stuff, this is going to go out the window. They're going to get made fun of. Like, this is not going to last but 10, 15 years. So there has to be some kind of way to bring this mysticism into the body, into the physical body, because that's the only thing that's going to be allowed to exist. And even then, we're going to try and put chips in it. So he's probably thinking, I got to get it as deep in the body as possible, because that's the only way that it's going to survive. And it's just like, Steiner did that too by merging it so much with the mind. He really wanted to make it make sense. So he did that too, but more with the making it survive so it would make sense, and it was more of an intellectual pursuit. He really gave that to it. So they both did that in their own way, making it survivable.
Wow, survivable. It's interesting, Gigi, you psychically anticipated my question, which was, how do you rank the Steiner work and its mystery school influence versus Gurdjieff's, which you pretty much answered there. Nicely done. And I think Theosophy and the Cayce work, how do you see the Cayce work in context, what you were just talking about with Steiner and Gurdjieff?
Well, Cayce was a deep trance channel. So he was functioning as just bringing pure information through and trying to get a ground, a foundation of just pure information and getting that out there, like a huge library of information that could come up at different times. So because he was just almost just channeling his higher self and just bringing just high energy through.
Amazing. Wow. And they gave us this hint about this lost city in the Gobi. And it's interesting that they're crisscrossing there, just like they crisscross on Atlantis and in Lemuria. What's so fascinating to me about the Gobi aspect is that it's an extension of Mu, and that we don't understand enough about Mu. I'm going to do a show just about Lemuria and Mu, because I don't think we understand Atlantis, oddly enough, a lot better. even though it's submerged in the public's consciousness. I think we understand the idea of the flood and the deluge. Lemuria is very obscure, and to think that this was the culmination of the best of Lemuria there in the Gold City in the Gobi gives us some idea of how advanced that they were.
Yeah, I love Mu, and the Lemuria, I do love that. And I've always had this feeling like if we can understand Mu, we can understand the Two-Eye Stone. That's always been my impression.
Well, it's very interesting because when you get into those names, we were doing a little bit of this, which is he talks about the city being called Taoi. It sounds a lot like the Two-Eye Stone again.
Yes, exactly. And I think that like the procession of Christ and that Christ lineage we were talking about, the reincarnations there, I think that society reincarnates and it takes certain things with it, the things that work, and they go forward and they build on top of that. And I think that's what we're looking at with Mu. And I think that, we look at Atlantis, but Atlantis is very influenced by Mu. And we don't necessarily see that, but there's elements of that in there.
Wow. What was Rata doing there?
Rata in Cayce's work is the son of a daughter of Zu. And Zu sounds a lot like Mu. And Muzuzen is, what language is this? What are they saying here?
Yeah.
And so they're talking about a lineage of people. And he is a child, or he's from someone of that lineage.
Oh, fascinating. One quick thing about that, which is so interesting you touched on this, because Rata, as described in the Cayce readings, they talk about how Rata's mother is kind of an outcast. And when they asked him further, why? And he says, well, she is a daughter of Zu and doesn't have a human father. And neither does Rata. So if it's not a human father, Gigi, going out on a limb here, who do you think then, if it's not a human father, what kind of father is it?
It is an interdimensional father that is from the lineage that I was speaking of, where it's the lineage of the future chain of planets that wants to magnetize Earth into balance and harmony, and they come and they try to assist with that by offering of themselves. And that's where that comes from, and that connects in with the Christ lineage and that whole story. All of that is different chapters of that exact pattern. The future chain planets, those higher density planets that are trying to magnetize Earth into a harmonious future with itself back up in density, those beings. And the Earth is the egg, and so the woman is going to be of the Earth, and the father is more cosmic, that's the sperm. And so that is the pattern that is adhered to in these things, and that's what they're talking about when they're talking about Ra. That's what they're saying. So that's what I picked up from it.
Fascinating. Well, deep on the esoteric line there, no question about it. Miss Olivia, I hand it over to you.
Okay, so Brian Lau wants to know, so who was Cayce in his past life? As if there's one. Of course, he had many.
Oh, Cayce? Well, Cayce was Rata, the high priest. He had so many interesting lives. He was Yolt, and when he was Yolt in Persia, he had this incredible impact, and they had a society there that was advanced again. This is 7000 BC. And what's very unusual is that there's a character named Zend in that story, and he's the father of Zoroaster. And Zoroaster, as we understand him in regular mythology, is 500 BC. So who's the 7000 BC Zoroaster, Gigi? What's going on there?
It's the same they're using the same language and the same names to signify that the same pattern is going on.
Right.
So that if we go through this deep period of forgetting like we're in, we can say, well, why is that name the same? Why is that story the same? And we can say, oh, it's the same people, it's the same group, it's the same pattern that keeps reoccurring in different times.
Right, right. That's an incredible length of time. If you think about 6,500 years between those two, and they're still using this. And this is the strange thing. And, you know, when Cayce, his work came forward and people like John Anthony West and Wilcock try to say, well, we have this 10,500 BC thing using archaeoastronomy and other things like the weathering pattern on the Sphinx. And a lot of those archaeologists who were locked into the way they had done archaeology in the 18th and 19th century said, well, wait a minute, you know, we have them going back 3,000 BC. Where's the 7,000 years in between? Like, you know, where's the culture in between there? And obviously that's that great unrecorded chapter that's missing, which is that civilization goes back much further than we're giving it credit for. And things like Göbekli Tepe now, it's starting to open up. And here's Cayce's work flowering from those readings in the 1920s, about 100 years later.
There's always somebody that holds down the fort, that, you know, there's always some prophets that, you know, work their whole life to the bone, trying to get the message through for the era, so that something can survive, you know, but that's the reality. But a lot of it's locked. I see it like locked etheric layers. So our Earth isn't just solid matter, like people like to think that it is. It's actually different etheric layers that unlock as our mind changes resonance. So the fact that we can't remember this era and find anything doesn't so much speak to our ability to find things and dig in the sand and have sonar and things like that. It's speaking about our cognition and our connection to spirit. Because once our consciousness starts to shift, we're going to find ourselves discovering these different artifacts, different things are going to rise around the Bimini area, like we were talking about. And we're going to find things being found, not because they have always been there, but because we are finally moving in that spiral of remembrance.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah. This is the period, and it's not just about, hey, you know, a hurricane blew over the stuff and we can see it now. It's that the actual consciousness level is ready.
That's right. And Cayce does talk about this. And I believe in Cayce's readings, he does mention that a lot of it is a gradual rise, I think, with parts of it. And it's directly connected to our collective magnetism and the magnetism of our mind, and what it's to do with thought forms. Thoughts are things, they have an energy. Our collective mind as a society pulls etheric layers in certain ways because of how we're thinking and feeling. It's a whole system that we can't see, but nonetheless is going on. And it's according to thoughts and emotions and our connection to spirit. Those subtle bodies determine all of that becomes material.
Wow, amazing. Miss Olivia.
Esoteric 369 Wall. Daniel, remember what Graham Hancock said about Lemuria?
Yeah, this is an unusual thing. Some people think that Lemuria actually is just based on the idea of these lemurs. But in fact, it goes back a lot further in the mystery school traditions. So we didn't get a chance really to talk about that, he and I, but and in fact, it does go back a lot further. Yes, keep rolling.
Okay, David Tormina wanted to know, Gigi, is this the honey? Is the honey what's in the man bags?
Well, he caught up with us there because we're planning a show.
You were working overtime in your mind there. Yeah, definitely. That the honey is what is in the handbags. They have their little pine cone that is the pollen applicator, right? And then they're putting it in their handbags, but it's actually talking about the transmutation of matter or wisdom. And the handbags are also, what I see them as, is part of a really ancient mythology story that we've forgotten.
Right.
There's just these things popping up, but we used to know. But the handbag is actually also a cube and a spiral, if you were to look at it with a higher dimensional mind, and that's describing evolution out of matter. So the cube represents matter, materialization, and that's also connected to Saturn. And honeycomb, which has the honeycomb structure in it, that's signifying that that's matter. That's symbolizing that that's materializing. And then a spiral out of it goes from honey to pollen. And so it's actually a creation story of matter. That's what's going on there. Another way to look at the bag would be a specific point of time that has materialized. And that's where the images on the bag come from, is it's talking about a certain period of time, a certain time that has materialized. That's what I got from it. But it's all kind of to do with bees and honey, which goes right in with, of course, the mystery schools and their use of that symbology.
That's so wild, because we did have that section on bees. I'll tell you this, which is this motif of these masters of wisdom coming out of the sea, and sometimes they're wearing like weird fish costumes. Actually, it looks like a man inside a fish costume. So it's definitely interesting overlays there of imagery, but they always have the bag. And of course, when they uncovered Göbekli Tepe, which is 12,000 years old, what did they find? They found the handle with the bag again. They found it in the Americas. So it is, this symbol, I think, is very powerful. And we're going to get into it. We're going to do a show on symbolism, and we're going to have you back for that, Gigi. Yes, Miss Olivia.
I just wanted to share this. Igor St. George's butler says, Roswell witness I met in Albuquerque who, quote, adopted me was a theosophist who looked and acted like Blavatsky, named Honey. Incredibly clairvoyant, tough as nails, wise beyond description. I'm sure there's great stories there. Marco Galrito says some theosophists say that bees could not have evolved in this globe. I've heard that also.
Oh, you know, that's interesting. This is something that Ledbetter used to say, Gigi, which is that bees were actually something that we got from Venus.
Oh,
Isn't that unusual?
I love that. That makes sense to me. I'm getting what they're saying.
All right, Miss Olivia.
Okay, so Maggie Smith has a bunch of great questions all connected. So do you have the coordinates of the Gobi city?
Well, I mean, I showed you what they have found in southern Gobi, and there's a number of news stories about that. But at the actual lost city of the Gobi, the way that Cayce described it, he doesn't give the coordinates, but he talks about it a whole lot. And how it's going to be uncovered, which I find very interesting. He's so confident in those readings, Gigi. He just says, which will be uncovered, which will be uncovered. So we're going to get it.
Well, I think they flew over it. I mean,
yeah. Now we're on it. Now they're on the trail.
Someone could have discovered it, actually, you know, and
yeah.
I don't know if that counts, if discovering means it has to become public for all to see, or whether, you know.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, we're back to the Poseidon temple issue when you get down to it, because he's talking about the first high civilization that will be revealed there about Atlantis, and Poseidon is right off the coast of Bimini. And we've seen the Bimini Road, and we did talk to Graham about him. He swam the Bimini Road. It is interesting because it's something distinctly relating to his prediction. He said the first thing you're going to see of it is 68 and 69. Well, they found it in 1968. So this is Cayce giving us that clue. It's a pretty major clue, because the land rising off the East Coast aspect, the Atlantis rising thing, is it poses so many interesting issues, because it's a consciousness issue, it's a history issue, but it's a geopolitical issue as well, because they are thinking when they look at it, oh my God, it's the Atlantean aspect. We know the Atlanteans had the two-eyed stone, and they were probably the most advanced humans that ever walked. So everybody dances around this aspect. So I think in terms of what we're going to see, if we see the Poseidon temple rise and we see them uncover the lost city in the Gobi, it's a game changer. It's a real game changer, Gigi.
It is a complete game changer. And if they can hide from us our past, then they can have huge control and influence in our life. Because when we start thinking in long strides and remembering in long strides, we notice patterns and we connect with our spirit. It's just the natural way of things. Because part of just being a psychic is just pattern recognition, very deep, intense pattern recognition. It's kind of like thinking in really long strides and almost like a synesthesia thing going on. If we start doing that in our own 3D life, noticing patterns, connecting dots, we'll become more intuitive by nature. And so they definitely don't want that, which is why we have to keep the pressure on and keep talking about, because we know what's up.
Big time. Miss Olivia.
Okay, so we're going to have to do a show at some point on portals, because there was a lot of interest in that. Maggie Smith also wanted to know, didn't the repetition schools create portals with their coherence? And portals aren't static, are they? Isn't it futile to try to keep them stable?
That's all, Gigi.
Okay, so with the portal stability, it's going to depend on where that's rooted. So if you can have a portal that's built, that is built properly, which means it's grounded in the correct higher dimensional stars, that portal can last for a very long time, because those stars for us don't change very often. So that can actually last a long time. Depends on the person the group that's created it, the person that's created it. Depends on if the flame is kept alive, the portal is kept alive. There's all sorts of different things that go into it. Depends on what it's for. There's so much different stuff that goes on to it. Of course, portals can die. There's certain places where they can be done where Stonehenge, and there's certain ones that are more strong than others. So there's a lot that goes into this. But the best thing to remember with it is that the most stable portals and most powerful ones, they have to be built by someone who understands the highest dimension possible, because that acts like the eye on top of the pyramid. That's the stabilizer. These portals that are built by like darker groups, you can't control them very well, because they don't have the access to the higher realms, the highest realms. That's only for the schools of light, essentially. And that's why they always want to hijack the portals and the technologies of the school of the light, is because they're better and they're more precise. And so a lot of it has to do with being able to tunnel as high as possible to get that stability, to build something really strong and really powerful. That was a lot of information.
Yes, indeed. Well, you know what's interesting about that, though? You make a really good point, which is the shortcuts that these groups try to make, who are trying to kind of control this thing. And they don't want to ascend themselves spiritually in order to apprehend it. They want to just use it for physical dominance, basically. And so it's kind of they're looking at these different shortcuts for things. They'll never be able to create the portals in the same way as those spiritual groups who actually ascend to that kind of activity.
No, you can't actually perceive those higher echelons of nuances. It's completely invisible to them. There's a membrane there that they cannot access. And also, if they try to force intuitives to do it, if they're afraid, those intuitives can't access it either. So it's only a very specific state, and it also involves past lives. So there's so many different things that go on with that. All the darker groups can really do is thwart, confuse, and project. And if they have you thinking that they can create that themselves and do all this stuff, then it's working. Because all they can really do is thwart people, try and destroy things, try to create confusion, so they can kind of nibble up those crumbs, right? And that's that dynamic there. But as for pure creation, deep creation, that's not possible unless in this reality, unless you can get up to those levels, which has to be done through the sacred teachings of the light.
Fascinating. You know, it's funny when you think about those groups and their activities also, it seems like there's a chain, an unbroken chain with them from Belial and that Atlantean past, just like there's an unbroken chain with the Amelius groups and the kind of Rosicrucian esoteric Christianity. They're both riding their this legacy that they have, and each one working basically one working to expand our whole trajectory spiritually, the evolutionary pattern, the new Jupiter pattern, and the other group looking for any opportunity to keep us in that realm, keep us in that kind of non-progressing realm and not using our real full potential. Those groups actually thrive on that.
They do. They need to. The whole system is parasitic. They can't actually connect with those higher frequencies because they're not able to reach that state, because they choose to be an ego and dominate people and be in fear. So they live parasitically. But any time that they choose to come to their heart and come to the truth of this reality, they are always welcome. And that's the truth. It doesn't matter. You can always come to your heart. You can always amend and atone. You can do that. Even though there's battles going on, it's not like who's right and who's wrong. It's not what's going on here. You can always come back to yourself, no matter where you are.
Excellent point.
You can always come back to the honey. You can always follow the bee.
There we go. The Cayce readings talk very much about Saturn being that place where all matter is recast, and almost like a maximum security prison. Very interesting. When I think about the soul trajectory of these people in these groups, I always think about Saturn. Steiner referred to something when New Jupiter was being created of those who wouldn't participate, and he called it the bitter moon. So we're getting some references here about what that could be.
That's what he called Saturn?
Well, no, it's interesting. Cayce had that reference about Saturn being where souls, the kind of like Hitler person, would go after they were reincarnated. They'd have to go there and sort of be melted back down,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I was looking in, when I had like the handbag thing and information come in with the honey, Saturn is the ultimate past. And it's when you can't release the past, you think you want to keep going back there and controlling it. And you're not in the present moment. That is what makes you solid and material. And that's what these darker groups, they live in the past. They're trying to re-win battles that nobody, just focus on something else. They're entrenching themselves in that matter that's represented in that Saturn chain. And it means that all of your etheric layers, where they were once beautiful like feathers and flowing, and you're able to use them, they're now merging together. So you can't even sense yourself anymore. You're just like a lump. You can't sense your own intricacies anymore. And it's hard to get out of yourself when you're that hard and that solid, because there's no give to you anymore. So you don't want that.
Wow, incredible. It's like the deep calcification of the pineal gland.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so interesting. Miss Olivia.
Brian Lau, does Gigi think chemtrails are holding us back from becoming more psychic?
I don't know much about chemtrails. DJ, maybe this is like a thing, but I think, aren't they supposed to be blocking actually the sun's rays, because the sun contains the spiritual light? Because we're talking about the incarnation of sun initiates and of the sun and the 8th chakra, which is the spiritual sun, and that light is activating for us.
Yeah.
And so each day we need to be adjusted and attuned, and that's kind of how we're designed. And so I think that we probably should be talking about our relationship to light a little bit more with that question, because I think the first thing is, Morgellons disease and that kind of thing. But I think there's a bigger issue going on.
Absolutely. Wow, it's absolutely fascinating. I think about Ilana Freeland's work, and how she's talking about how they're ionizing the atmosphere so that literally every person is becoming a different kind of a tower that they can use as part of a global grid. I find that very, very interesting. But Miss Olivia, keep rolling.
Okay, occult fan. Is the main lesson of the mystery schools the lesson that we are eternal and that we are all one contained entity, and that empathy and communication are the main aims of the white path?
The white path. That's an interesting one. I'll throw that to you, Gigi.
I think that if I were to look at, the mysteries in schools, I think that they're sort of a multidimensional thing where they speak to you what you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think that you could sum them up with one message. I think it's something that you dance with. And that's their whole thing. Their whole thing is that they work with symbols that have been used throughout time, with myths, whether they be old myths and mysteries, whether they be, Gurdjieff writing new ones about camels in the desert. It's sort of like this spiritual play that you do in tradition that builds you. But I wouldn't say that I don't think that they try to teach you one message. I think that they try to teach you how to find your message and how to connect. That's what I would say. I would say it's dynamic.
It's dynamic. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Okay. Dave Attack. I don't know how to pronounce your last name. I hope that's right. Gigi mentioned earlier that the other side is on a timeline to complete their goals.
Yes.
Where are we on that timeline? What must we do to counter?
The really interesting thing about time is that light is always on time, and light works super, super, super fast. So if you're working in the light, everything kind of accelerates and things can happen a lot faster because of the synergy that's created with light. So even though sometimes it feels like we're behind, there can be periods of great synergy and super fast movement because we're moving with nature. We're moving with the light. And so you should never think that just because things are very dark, that's not how things go, because that's the reality. But they are on a timeline, absolutely, because they have the same timelines that cosmically have been configured that other intuitive places have. We're all working on the same cycle. I mean, whether you want to call it Kali Yuga or cosmic night or the procession, we all kind of see the density shifts and the consciousness shifts.
Wow, very interesting. Miss Olivia.
Okay, Najat Madri wanted to know, are the stilts, are they the same as the Dogon?
Well, Gigi, when Gigi got into the stilts and understood right off the bat that section I had sent her was written in code, I found something very unusual about the stilts. I started to look at them very differently. I never had that interpretation until Gigi came along. So Gigi, when you think of the Dogon and their very unusual tribal ritual stilts, are they demonstrating the similar?
Yeah, I think I never considered that, but they also have that super high Tower of Babel hat, don't they? Where it's like the stilts aren't enough, like let's build it up to like where your neck can barely carry it, and then they do the thing and the tower's falling, and so they're it's telling it's the same thing.
Are they do you think there's a tradition there where they're dealing with giants and they are wearing those in order to kind of meet and greet their giants?
That's another one that could very well be. And there also could be, that the giants were, when you do psychic work, you feel huge. Like sometimes when you're doing psychic work, like you feel like you're the size of the room sometimes, like you feel so much bigger than you are because your energy body just expands. I sometimes wonder if the giants weren't people that were coming from a higher density where they were mirroring that your body's just like bigger when you have that sort of.
It's like a projection.
Yeah, it's like that's how you feel giants. Like there's some times where I've come back in my body and I'm like, whoa, compact. Like you feel so smaller when because you just go out so big.
Wow, incredible. It's funny to think too about those traditions in the Bible about the sons of God with the daughters of men, and they produce giants, and there are all these big problems with giants after that. It is quite fascinating. There seems to be something tied in with the size aspect of some of these figures in the past. The David and Goliath story also has this idea. So there's some ingrained imagery and memory there. Gigi, the kind of cone head skulls, this elongated skull, like in Paracas, Peru, and these different traditions for it. We see it in Egypt when we're looking at Akhenaten and those pictures. What's going on with this elongated skull? Is this something to do with the pineal gland?
Yeah, I've actually never tuned into that, but it could be, a very large gland,
Yes.
like so large that your head is
Yeah.
totally different shape.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. Incredible. Miss Olivia. We're going to take 2 more questions.
Okay.
Then...
Well, the 6 fingers,
yes.
You could have gone into more detail on that one. So
yes.
Justin Christensen said giant skeletons that are found have 6 fingers.
Yeah.
And everybody says those are the Nephilim.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Here's the interesting thing about the fingers that I've discovered, which is if you go into caves into Utah and New Mexico, you'll find those handprints on the wall made by the hand that has 6 fingers.
Oh.
So the first question is, why are they in the cave? And the second question is, why do they have 6 fingers? So it seems to me there's a group back there. Now, it does happen in nature at times as a kind of, they'll call it like a freak accident sometimes when it happens now, that somebody will have an extra toe or an extra finger. But I think what we're looking at back there is an actual group, and this is part of their characteristics. And it seems to me that they're represented very often in caves. Gigi, caves again, and advanced, unusual people.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we go back to the blue beings, they were very large and they came from a higher density and they had 6 fingers. So they obviously were coming from somewhere else, and their body was still retaining half of the qualities from where they came from, and then also adjusting to here. And they were forced underground, I would say. But the underground's also very magical in itself. It has a lot of magic to it.
Yes.
So it's easier to do certain things underground in caves and things like that because of the womb nature of that. But I think, as we've projected forward from kind of that origin story where we see giants and people interacting, I think that we've become more and more dense. And I think that there still are some recessive qualities that you can find that I think would embody those. But I think most of the signifiers now are in the DNA or more hidden. You can't look at people as much anymore. There's still some recessive traits. And if you know what they are, then you know what they are. But back then, everything was so much newer and the portals were open and everything was meshing and the veil was a lot thinner. So you were getting these different types of people, different types of beings. But now it's a lot more closed. It's a lot more dense. It's a lot more heavier. And so we're not seeing that. It's hard to believe that it even ever was, but we have those handprints in those caves and those vestiges and things like that.
Wow, incredible. It is amazing. And, I always think about Rata when he's exiled from Egypt, when they do this whole thing to get rid of him. And the Atlanteans and the priests try to get rid of him because of all the reforms he has. And they trip him up and he gets exiled to Ethiopia. And what Cayce says about him there is he operated inside the mount. And then you have Moses on the mount. And then you've got, all of these stories about the mount and the fires in the mount. And we think about these cave churches and this kind of legacy of things that they've left. And then the lost city of gold in the Gobi, again, it's underground. It's kept away somewhere. Something about Gigi, they're trying to tell us something that things are kept beneath layers. And we might think, okay, they're in a mountain, they're in a cave church, but it's actually, there's an energetic signifier in the mount.
Yeah, there is. Things are more malleable when you go in caves and when you go underneath the earth. And there's also certain portals in there as well. There's certain windows in those caves and in the inner earth as well, that maintain a fire for the planet too. So they maintain a warmth, you could say, a fire, a warmth, a spiritual warmth.
Gigi,
So
you answered my question before I asked it again. My next question was going to be, why do they say the fires that Rata left in the mount can still be seen today? What fires, what mount? Fascinating.
yeah, well, it's there's times when the fire comes out of the mount and warms the world. And then there's times where it seems very quiet, but the fire is always in the mount.
Uh-huh.
And it's a spiritual warmth. It's a magnetic pull upwards. That's what I would say.
Excellent. Miss Olivia, let's take the last question tonight.
I'm just going to follow up on the six finger thing. William Climax says, in the Bible, the children of Israel were commanded by Yahweh to wipe out the Amorites, whose height was high as cedars. They had 6 fingers and 6 toes and were fond of eating human flesh also.
Oh, fascinating.
There's a lot to research there.
There's some cannibalism.
Okay. Well, let me ask one short question.
Sure.
So Eric Vossler said, thoughts on Netflix's The OA and Mystery School Disclosure. I've heard good things about this, but I haven't watched it.
Yeah, I think you're going to look, we're in the period where they're taking shots at the mystery schools now by taking shots at the Waldorf school. That's a really open volley. I mean, they've gone after these things in small ways before, but I think you're going to see them really trying to get rid of that history. And it's very important. This is the period, again, when the mystery schools are coming forward. When they did come forward initially, they faced incredible resistance, remember. And they were subject to scandal and everything else. And they learned how to cope with it. But all of those people who led those schools, like Steiner, like Besant, like Blavatsky, went through incredible public trials to get the word out. So now that it's coming back around, you're going to see a lot of resistance to it. In terms of mystery school disclosure, the work is before us, and they have put the work out for us. They've disseminated it in this course since 1875 to get the word out through theosophy and anthroposophy. So that work is there for us. And we're not going to need like a central clearinghouse for it. They've laid it out for us, and it's up to us to apprehend it and I guess catch up to their next step. How do you see that, Gigi?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Okay. All right, Miss Olivia, you get it. Last.
Do I ask the big one or the funny one? I don't know. I'm tempted. Okay, so I'll ask the big one. Jonathan Paul de Virville.
Yes.
How can and will the mystery schools discern and defend humanity against AI and transhumanism?
Well, they already have through the work of Rudolf Steiner, because he warned us about Ahriman coming through directly through the technology. So the transhumanist move has been outlined. They've given us the sketch and the outline. There may be more in the Steiner work for us to discover that lays that out further. But with the material and the way we've assimilated, I think that it's possible we've got only a small fraction of Steiner's picture, larger picture. Remember that I said I felt that he worked 3 decades, and throughout all the other things that he did, he basically worked 3 decades to tell us about Ahriman and the battle that's taking place over the evolution, the natural spiritual evolutionary step of humanity versus the 8th sphere. And it's very interesting too, because the 8th sphere, Gigi, if we look at this cosmologically, is kind of a weird caricature clone of the 8th chakra that you were discussing.
I noticed that it's sort of like, yeah, because we were just talking about, someone just mentioned cannibalism.
Yeah.
So we have to remember that these forces are parasitic.
Yes.
They live off of, they plagiarize, they copy, they'll drink your blood, they can't create anything. So what they do is they try to thwart, like destroy Waldorf schools or whatever, and steal and pillage. That's kind of what they do. But it's good that all of the information's out there, because it's also not the mystery school's job to tell us everything. It's our job to also remember half of it, at least remember some of this and connect with our own intuition. Remember, it's not other people's job to tell us about what's going on. We also have to become active participants in our intuition.
Right, absolutely. Miss Olivia, you had a funny one.
Well, I just thought it could go in a funny direction. So Griffin Eagle 7
Yeah.
wanted to know, do you think Crowley was sent to spy on Gurdjieff?
Whoa, very interesting.
What was the last part of that?
Do you think Crowley was sent to spy on Gurdjieff? Now, here's a funny story, Gigi. I think you know this story, maybe, but Crowley went to the Priory, which is where Gurdjieff's harmonious development of man was, and Gurdjieff threw him out. There's a classic story about
Bad aura.
Exactly. So there's always been an unusual thing there about Crowley and Gurdjieff, and the kind of like coming from two totally different places and perspectives. I think Crowley is very interesting in this sense, which is that he knew so much, and that the thing is, it comes down to, you know, their whole thing was about do what you will. That's the whole of the law, and that's sort of the backwards thing to the mystery schools, which is know thyself. It's totally different. So, you know, we have these inferences that the left-hand schools can actually apprehend the data. They can know the history. They can know the ceremonies. You know, they can know the whole thing, but they don't have the idea in mind of sacrificing for humanity. They want to get up that tree of life some other way. They want to merge with, you know, in the transhumanist fashion, they want to merge as a cybernetic organism to get up the tree of life from animal to mineral. Gigi, I think that's it, really. Like they come in maybe with the same knowledge base, but they're coming from a totally different place.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of connecting into what a cult fan said. Maybe he was precogging the question, where it's like, you know, the light mystery schools, they do realize that we're all one. At the end of the day, that's why it's know thyself, because if you can know yourself, then you know, in a sense, everybody, and you know the cosmos, and you know the world, and you have this inner working to live with. And so the do what that will, would you like anybody to just do whatever they will with you? And if you weren't strong enough that day and someone stole your lunch and kicked you, you deserve it because you weren't good enough that day.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry, but you're not winning the game if you're cheating and stealing candy from babies. Like we're not all playing, no one's playing that game. You know, that's the difference in mentality here. It's just a completely different mindset. Totally, these different sides are just completely different spheres, if you will, different mindsets.
Oh, wow, it's interesting. It's Gigi Amelius and Belial Ahriman.
Yeah, they're just totally different ways they couldn't imagine. Yeah, they're just different ways of processing.
Unbelievable. Everyone, Gigi Young, at gigiyoung.com, and of course her incredible YouTube videos. We did a special taping when Gigi was here. It was great to have you here, and we taped some incredible shows around the X-steganography, and you're going to be seeing those. Very powerful work, and I highly recommend all the work that Gigi does. I often say this, that there's no greater ally or friend to the X series than Gigi. So Gigi, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you real soon.
Well, thank you very much.
It's great to see you. Miss Olivia, the last word is yours, of course.
Well, I have a lot of thanks to give out. Destiny McCartney, Bill Gametz, Raspergu, Neil Hart, Tricky Vicky, Vance Landry, Brian Lau, Roosevelt Media News, Scabtree Scabby, Dave Attack, Doyle Wayne, Eric Ackerley. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Wow, incredible. Thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate it. And thanks for getting behind the show, Coming up next week, some very powerful things are happening. You're going to want to be here next Friday for a very special X-Series episode, and be here at 8 o'clock. We're going very deep on the missing trillions, so you can kind of guess a little bit about that. And
So we're not doing a special show tomorrow night? Or
uh,
are we? We're considering
oh
it.
yeah. Well, there is. Watch your newsletter, everybody. 'Cause there may be a special show tomorrow night as well. I do want to say thank you to everyone. I see Groovy Bean out there, fantastic. Najat, and also a cult fan, Thomas Tyson, terrific. Roosevelt Media, outstanding work that you guys have been doing. I saw Kate out there earlier. Thank you, Kate. And just a great show tonight. David Termina, of course, fantastic. Plan B. I see you all tonight. It's great to have everyone here. So we will be coming back Friday night at 8 o'clock. There may be a special show tomorrow. Something very special is going on with that. And, it's just outstanding to think about that whole treatise that Gigi gave on these dynamics around the lost city. Just great. She was outstanding tonight. So thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. And we will be back maybe sooner than you think. And Miss Olivia, you get the last word.
Something with melted cheese. Thank you.
Did you not say fajitas earlier?
I think fajitas. I think guacamole, melted cheese.
I'm a huge
sizzling.
I'm a huge guacamole fan. You
Yes,
got me
you
so
are.
far. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, and we will be seeing you shortly.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Go be. Go be or go home.